The morning Deborah Armstrong decided she was done being afraid she burned the eggs. Not from distraction. She knew exactly what she was doing. She was standing at the stove at 6:45 in the morning, watching the yellow circles in the skillet go brown at the edges, go darker than brown, go wrong. And she was letting them go because Dale Tanner's truck had been parked across the street until 2 in the morning. And she had stood at the kitchen window behind its blanket for most of those hours. And she had not slept. And the eggs were burning because she was too tired to reach forward and turn down the gas. She turned it down finally, slid the pan off the burner, stood for a moment with her hand on the counter, and the smell of scorched egg filling the small kitchen, and the morning light coming in around the edges of the blanket, pinned above the window, thin gold lines that drew a rectangle she never looked at directly. Clementine came in from the hallway in her socks. 7-year-old hair not yet brushed, wearing the pink nightshirt with the faded rabbit on the front, the one that had been through the wash so many times the rabbit had gone from pink to something closer to the color of old paper. She looked at the pan. She looked at her mother. She didn't say anything about the eggs. She had stopped sometime in the last few months saying the things children say when things go wrong in small, ordinary ways. She had stopped saying things like, "Mama, the eggs are burned." She had stopped saying things like, "Are we going to be late?" She had stopped asking questions that assumed the morning was a normal morning. Instead, she climbed up onto her chair at the table and put her hands flat on the surface and waited. And Deborah looked at her daughter's face and saw the specific kind of tired that had nothing to do with sleep, and made herself smile anyway, the way you made yourself smile when the alternative was the thing you could not afford to show a 7-year-old at 6:45 in the morning. "I'll make oatmeal," Deborah said. Clementine nodded. Her hands stayed flat on the table. Deborah made the oatmeal and put brown sugar on it and set it in front of her daughter and poured herself coffee and stood at the counter and drank it standing because sitting felt like the beginning of a conversation she was not ready to have. The kitchen was clean. She kept it clean because cleaning was the thing she could control when everything else was beyond it. The counter wiped the dishes put away, the floor swept. The refrigerator had children's drawings held up with fruit-shaped magnets. A row of boots by the back door, one pair small and one pair larger. A puzzle half assembled on the table between the chairs. Horses in a mountain meadow, maybe 40% complete. She kept the house clean, and she kept the locks locked, and she kept the blankets over the windows, and she kept the lights on in every room. And none of that was enough. She knew it wasn't enough. She had known for months. Clementine ate her oatmeal slowly. Deborah watched her and thought about the composition book in the drawer under the counter, the one with 6 months of small, precise handwriting, times and dates, durations, the specific architecture of Dale Tanner's presence mapped in ink. She had brought that book to the sheriff's department 3 months ago. The deputy who looked at it had the particular expression of a man performing interest while calculating how quickly he could end the conversation. He had flipped through maybe a third of it. He had told her that none of it constituted a violation. She had filed twice for a protective order. The first time the judge had said, "insufficient grounds." The second time the filing had simply stopped. No rejection, no hearing date, no correspondence. The papers she had submitted had entered some administrative space and not come out the other side. And when she had called to ask about it, she had been told it was being processed. And then she had been told there was no record of a second filing, and she had stood in her kitchen holding the phone with the very particular experience of understanding that the system she was appealing to had a hole in it that was exactly the shape of her situation. That was 8 months ago now. 8 months of composition book entries, 8 months of blankets over windows, 8 months of her daughter sleeping in the closet off the hallway because the closet had no windows and it was the farthest point from Dale Tanner's property, and Clementine had moved herself there 3 months ago without being asked, dragging her blankets and her stuffed horse and her 3 books across the hall carpet. And Deborah had helped her without crying until she was in her own room with the door closed. Clementine finished her oatmeal. She put her spoon down with the deliberate care of a child who was being careful about everything. "I'll get my shoes," she said. "I'll be right there," Deborah said. She stood in the kitchen for a moment after her daughter left. She looked at the window behind its blanket. She looked at the rectangle of gold light around its edges. She thought about Dale Tanner in his black truck at 2 in the morning, the engine off, the lights off. Just parked there, just present, the way he had been present for 8 months now, patient and steady, and completely without aggression in any form that the law could see. She thought about what she had been told at the sheriff's department, that his behavior, while strange and unsettling, did not meet the legal threshold for actionable harassment. That a man sitting in a vehicle on a public street had every right to do so. That unless he touched property, threatened someone directly, or committed an act she could document as illegal, there was nothing to be done. She thought about the second filing and the way it had simply ceased to exist. She was 34 years old. She had moved here from Maryville 6 years ago when Clementine's father had left, when the small town had become too small, and she had needed the particular anonymity of a city that wasn't quite large enough to feel like a city. She had a job she liked at a medical billing office, a house she rented with a porch she had never sat on in daylight because the porch faced Dale Tanner's house. She had a daughter who slept in a closet and ate her oatmeal with her hands flat on the table as if bracing. She had done everything right. She had documented, she had reported, she had filed, she had locked every lock and covered every window and told herself that the proper channels existed for a reason. She knew now what the proper channels were for. They were for situations that fit. Hers did not fit because someone had made sure it would not fit, and that someone was Dale Tanner, who paid his taxes and kept his lawn and spoke pleasantly to the neighbors on either side, and had in 8 months never raised his voice or broken anything or committed a single legally visible act. She picked up her keys. She called to Clementine. She checked the 3 locks on the back door and the 3 on the front, and she took her daughter to school, and then she went to work. And she sat at her desk in the medical billing office, and she did her job. And she did not think about what she was going to do, because she did not yet know what there was to do. That was a Tuesday in late July. The heat in Knoxville was the kind that came down personal. It was also the day her daughter talked to a biker at a gas station. Deborah did not know about this until after. She had been inside the convenience counter for 4 minutes, buying a bottle of water and a pack of crackers for Clementine's after-school snack. And when she came out, Clementine was sitting on the curb at the far end of the building in the narrow stripe of shade, and beside her in a crouch was a large man in road-worn leather with a motorcycle parked at the pumps behind him. Deborah moved fast, the cold, particular speed of a mother who has looked up and lost sight of her child and found her in a context she had not arranged. Her hand went to Clementine's shoulder. She looked at the man. He was already straightening, already moving back, giving her room. He had the particular quality of a man who understood exactly how he looked to a woman in this situation, and was responding to that understanding before she had to ask. Big, broad leather cut, with patches, road boots, the kind of face that had covered a lot of miles. He looked at her without apology, but also without hostility. She was just sitting here, he said. We were talking. Deborah looked at her daughter. Clementine looked back at her with the flat, exhausted eyes she had been wearing for months. Not afraid, not guilty, just tired the way she was always tired now. Sorry, Deborah said. The word carried several things. Nothing to be sorry for, the man said. His voice was level and low. She's a good kid. Deborah guided Clementine to the car. She got her daughter in the passenger seat. She went around to the driver's side, and before she got in, she looked back once, not at the man, at nothing in particular, the nervous sweep she had developed over 8 months checking for the black truck, checking for Dale Tanner's shape in a window, checking for the particular quality of presence that had trained her body to stay alert. The man was watching her, not predatorily, more like someone taking a reading. She got in the car and drove away. She didn't think about it again until dinner, when Clementine said, while eating her beans and rice, with the same careful flatness she brought to everything now. He asked me why I was tired. Deborah set her fork down. What did you tell him? I told him I hadn't slept. Clementine moved a bean around her plate. He asked how long. Honey, I told him 5 days. She looked up. He didn't laugh. No, Deborah said. He looked like he understood. Clementine turned back to her plate. He had a motorcycle. It was loud. Deborah looked at her daughter. 7 years old, and she had found a stranger at a gas station and told him the things she had stopped telling everyone who was supposed to help, because everyone who was supposed to help had already failed her. And the stranger had not laughed and had not said, I'm sure it's fine, and had not performed concern while looking for the exit. He looked like he understood. Deborah thought about that for a long time after Clementine was in her closet with the door closed and the stuffed horse in the books and the small sound of her daughter's breathing that Deborah could only hear if she stood in the hallway with her own breath held. She thought about it while she made her evening entry in the composition book. Dale Tanner's truck had arrived at 10:47. It was still there. She could tell because of the particular quality of darkness on the right side of the house, the way the streetlight pattern changed when his truck blocked part of it. She had learned to read darkness by now. She had learned the shapes it made when something was in it. Kane Gallagher had been riding since before the sun fully cleared the ridge that morning. He was 41 years old road captain of the Iron Testament M.C. Knoxville chapter, and he had the hands to prove the years. Knuckles gone thick, 2 fingers on his right hand that no longer straightened completely, a scar along his left forearm that he had stopped explaining when he realized he no longer thought about it. He wore his cut the way soldiers wore rank, not for other people, because taking it off would mean he had stopped earning it. He had been heading to a charitable run through Gatlinburg, a veterans shelter fundraiser, when he had stopped at Barton's Fill on Old Route 9. He needed gas. He noticed the girl on the curb because she was in the wrong place, the particular quality of not quite right that years of paying attention had made automatic. Small child, yellow t-shirt with the image washed to ghosts, broken sandal straps sitting with her knees up and her chin on them, and her eyes doing something that had no business being in a 7-year-old's eyes. She had looked at him without fear. That was the first thing. Most children had a reaction to a man like Kane. This one had not. She had looked at him the way very old people sometimes looked at things, with the exhaustion of concluded observation. He had crouched down. She had told him she was tired. He had asked how long. She had done the calculation with her eyes the way people did when the number was larger than they wanted to say out loud. And then she had said, 5 days. 5 days. He had been in 2 combat deployments. He knew the specific weight of sustained sleeplessness, the particular flavor of waiting for something that never stopped coming. This was that. In a child. At a gas station in Tennessee in July, he had asked, why? She had looked at him with the calculation of someone running an assessment, deciding whether this stranger had earned an answer. And she had been in the middle of reaching some conclusion about that when her mother had come through the glass door, moving at the specific speed of a woman who had lost sight of her child and found her next to a large man in leather. He had stepped back. He had let the mother read him and find him not a threat. He had watched them go. He came back to himself 4 miles down Route 9, pulled over on a gravel shoulder, lit a cigarette he had been carrying in his cut pocket for 2 days without meaning to smoke, and held the 3 words that had been assembling themselves since the gas station. He comes at night. She had said it in the flattest voice he had ever heard a child use. Not dramatic, not urgent. The voice of someone stating a fact about the structure of the world. The sun is hot. The summer is long. He comes at night. That was worse than crying. That was a child who had stopped expecting things to change. He stubbed out the cigarette, half-smoked. He texted Rhett Dalton, his road partner, and the closest thing he had to a conscience on 2 wheels. Running late, catch the column in Saviorville. Then he turned the bike around. He found out what he needed to find out through the network that Red had, which ran through a case manager named Lisa Torrance at Community Services, which ran through the county records that Kane had looked up before he had even asked himself why. The woman at the house was named Deborah Armstrong, 34, originally from Maryville in Knoxville, 6 years. Single mother, no father in the picture. The man next door was named Dale Tanner, 49, contractor, odd jobs for the county, light criminal history that never became convictions. Kane drove out to Cutter Road that afternoon with Rhett behind him. The street was the kind of place that existed just far enough outside of everything to be slightly outside of everything. A two-lane strip off the county road, short stretch of modest houses, a turnaround at the end by a field. The Armstrong house was the last one on the left. Pale yellow paint peeling at the eaves, a porch with no railing, a flower bed that had been planted with optimism and then stopped being tended. A tricycle on the porch with streamers that had been bleached from red to pink. The older Honda in the driveway. Next door, a beige rancher. The kind of house that communicated nothing about the person inside except that they had no interest in communicating. A black truck in the driveway. And along the property line between the two lots, a row of tomato plants in wire cages planted close enough to the fence that tending them required being close to the fence, close to anyone in the yard next door. The plants were recent, deliberate, the kind of deliberate that took patience and time and the careful cultivation of proximity. Kane understood them immediately. He climbed the porch steps and knocked. A long silence, then the careful sound of someone approaching a door without announcing themselves. He saw the curtain on the side window move. He said his name. He said Iron Testament, MC. He said he was not there to cause trouble, that he had met her daughter at Barton's Fill. Multiple locks disengaged. The door opened to the length of a security chain. Deborah Armstrong looked at him through the gap. She was more tired than the gas station had suggested. Tired in the way that had been going on too long to be fixed with rest. Still in the blunted way that sustained stress did to a face, smoothing out the expressiveness, flattening the small animations that made a person fully readable. She looked at him with the assessment she had clearly been using for a long time, the rapid categorization of men into categories of threat. "What do you want?" she said. "To talk," Kane said. Nothing else. She looked at Rhett on his bike in the street. She looked back at Kane. "About what?" "Your daughter told me she hasn't slept in 5 days," Kane said. "And she told me someone comes at night." Something moved in Deborah's eyes. Not surprise, recognition. The particular look of someone for whom the thing they had been dreading kept being confirmed. "She's a child," Deborah said. "She talks to strangers." "She told me because she ran out of people she knows," Kane said. He said it without edge. Just true. The silence that followed had weight in it. Then the chain slid free and the door opened. Inside the house told its own story. Blankets covered the two windows in the living room. Not curtains. Blankets pinned at the top, heavy ones. A bookshelf had been moved from its original position. Kane could tell by the marks in the carpet, moved to the wall nearest the neighboring property, creating a buffer of furniture between that wall and the room. Locks visible on every door, including interior ones. A nightlight in the hallway. All the lights on in every occupied room in the middle of the day. Children's drawings on the refrigerator. Rubber boots by the back door, one small pair and one larger. A puzzle half assembled on the coffee table. Horses in a mountain meadow. The house was clean in the way that clean was an act of control when everything else was beyond it. Clementine was sitting in the far corner of the living room with a pile of books. She looked up when Kane came in. The same eyes from the gas station. The flat exhaustion, the assessment. Then something shifted in her face, the faintest recognition, the placing of him into a category that was not threat. "Hey," Kane said. "Hey," she said. Kane looked at Rhett, who had stayed outside, which was Kane's preference. One large man in a frightened woman's space was already a significant thing to ask her to absorb. They sat at the kitchen table. Deborah had her hands flat on the surface, not gripping anything, deliberate. "How did you find us?" she asked. "I asked around," Kane said. "I have a friend with connections to community services. I didn't pull anything official. I just needed to know you were real." She thought about that for a moment. There was something in her silence that wasn't reluctance exactly, more like the recalibration of someone who had been let down by everyone who had claimed they could help, and was now deciding whether to spend any more of whatever was left of her belief in people. "She's a good kid," he said. "She figured you were worth finding." Deborah looked at the table. Then she began to talk. She told it like field reporting. Times, dates, the history of 8 months. The first time the truck had appeared. The way the presence had evolved. The parking at night so the headlights hit the bedroom windows. The walk along the property line. The way he would plant himself in his yard precisely when she and Clementine were in theirs, saying nothing, just being there. The whispering through the windows, so low Clementine couldn't always make out words, low enough that Deborah could never fully convince herself she had actually heard it either. "He never breaks anything," Deborah said. "He never raises his voice. He never touches anything. He knows where the lines are," Kane said. She looked at him. "How do you know that phrase?" "Because it's a phrase," Kane said. "There's a kind of man who knows it and lives inside it. The kind who has spent years learning exactly how much damage you can do while keeping every official hand off you." She was quiet. "Then I filed twice." She told him about the first filing and what the judge had said. She told him about the second filing and the way it had simply ceased to exist. She spread her hands on the table in a gesture that was both helpless and furious and exhausted. "He knows somebody. I don't know who. I don't know where. But something keeps not working." "You have documentation," Kane said. She stood and pulled a composition book from the drawer under the counter. Black and white cover, the pages filled with small, precise handwriting. She held it out. She said, "I brought this to the sheriff's department 3 months ago." The deputy looked at it for 2 minutes. Kane took it, opened it. The entries went back 6 months, each one noting arrival time, departure time, duration, additional actions. Flashlight through window. Property line walk, 11 minutes. One entry that simply said, "Knocked on back door, no stated purpose, left after 9 minutes." The handwriting was consistent all the way through. That was its own kind of document. Consistent handwriting under sustained fear. He looked at her. "Can I borrow this?" "That's the second copy," she said. "I scanned everything." He looked at her. "You're careful." "I've had to be," she said. He took the notebook and stood. He was starting toward the door when she said, "Can I ask you something?" He turned. "Why do you care?" She asked it plainly, not accusatory, not dismissive. The honest question of a woman who had spent 8 months having her situation not matter to people whose job it was to make it matter. She was genuinely asking why this stranger with the leather cut and the road boots and the motorcycle outside had turned his bike around and come to her house. Kane thought about the answer he could give that would be true but incomplete, and the answer he could give that would be true and whole. And he chose neither of them because neither was ready to be said in this kitchen to this woman he had met 40 minutes ago. "I know what this kind of fear does," he said instead. That was enough for now. That was true. She looked at him for a long moment. Whatever she was measuring seemed to settle. From the living room, the small sound of a page turning. "You'll come back?" Deborah asked. Kane looked toward the corner where her daughter sat with her books. He came back around and crouched down, bringing himself level with Clementine. She looked up at him with the flat, calculating eyes running the internal test. "I'll come back," he said. She looked at him the way she had looked at the gas station. The long assessment, the decision being made. "Okay," she said. One word. Careful. Not quite hope, but the thing adjacent to hope, when hope had been injured enough times that it learned to hold itself more carefully. He walked out into the Tennessee heat. Rhett was leaning against his bike, arms crossed, watching the beige house next door without appearing to watch it. 2 years younger than Kane, wire-built, where Kane was broad, quiet in the way of a man who was always listening for something most people could not hear. He had been a combat medic. They had found each other the way veterans often found each other. Not through shared history exactly, but through the vocabulary you only got from having been in certain rooms. The way they held space. The way they sat with their backs to walls. The things they didn't say at breakfast. He's in there, Rhett said quietly. Curtain moved twice while you were inside. Kane looked at the beige house, at the tomato plants along the property line, at the black truck in the driveway, new enough to be maintained, old enough to have been earned. You getting a read? Rhett asked. Yeah, Kane said. I'm getting a read. He started his bike. He looked once more at the yellow house, the peeling paint the porch without its railing, the pink streamers on the tricycle going still in the heat. I need you to make some calls, he said. Rhett waited. Brotherhood Network. Southeast first, then expand. Anyone who's done a charitable run, anyone who does veteran outreach, anyone who has a reason to care about what happens to families, this system walks past. Rhett looked at him. You thinking what I think you're thinking? I don't know yet. I need to think it through. He pulled out of the street. 3 blocks later, his phone buzzed with a text from a number he didn't recognize. He pulled over. The text said, I know who you are. Kane looked at the screen. His pulse was steady. 3 years of combat deployments. He had been in rooms where things moved faster than thought, where the gap between a decision and its consequence was measured in fractions. He had learned in those rooms that the cold thing that moved through your system when something turned bad was information, not catastrophe. The body telling you the situation had changed. The body preparing you to respond. He read it again. I know who you are. His phone buzzed again. Same number. Interesting friends she's making. Dale Tanner had his name inside 20 minutes of a visit Kane had not announced to anyone, which meant he had been watching the road, which meant he had recorded the plates, run them through whatever contact he had that let him run plates, and found Kane's name in the kind of time that required either pre-existing infrastructure or a very short path to someone with access. Both possibilities said the same thing about Dale Tanner. Kane put the phone back in his cut pocket without responding. A man who sent a message like that was probing for panic, testing whether you could be scared off before anything had even started. Your first response to that probe set the terms for everything that came after. Silence was an answer. Silence said, I have seen worse than you. Silence said, you have not yet understood what you started. He rode back to the chapter garage on Merchant Street. Rhett was already there, had beaten him by 10 minutes by a different route. 2 other bikes in the lot. From inside, the sound of someone working a socket wrench in the irregular rhythm of a job not going well. Rhett was sitting outside on the bench with a paperback when Kane came and sat down beside him. They communicated for a while in the way they communicated on things that mattered, with silence first to make sure the words that came out afterward were the right ones. You know anything about a Dale Tanner? Kane said eventually. County contractor, odd jobs for municipal parks department. Rhett lowered the book. Give me something more specific. Kane told it straight. The girl on the curb, the 5 days without sleep, the 3 words. The house with the blankets over the windows and the furniture moved to walls. The composition book was 6 months of entries dismissed in 2 minutes. The 2 filings that had gone nowhere. When he was done, Rhett sat with it for a moment. She say his name. Her daughter said, he comes at night. Deborah gave me his name. The text. Rhett looked at the phone Kane held out toward him. He turned it over, nodded once. That's not something you do in 20 minutes unless you already have the tools running. That's a man with a system. Kane looked at the neon of a bar down the block, the sign orange and red in the fading afternoon light. I want to know about the filings, why they went nowhere. That's going to take some careful asking. Ask careful then. He drove out to the Armstrong house again the next morning, told himself on the way that it was a drive-by, a visibility check, something that fit within the normal parameters of community concern. Told himself that for about 4 blocks and then stopped pretending. He had told Clementine he would come back. He was not the kind of man who said things he did not mean. He parked in front of the house, not in the driveway, made himself visible. The black truck was in Tanner's driveway. It was 9 in the morning. Deborah answered faster this time, 3 locks, but her hands moved through them with the efficiency of someone who had done it thousands of times. She looked at him, then past him at the truck. He was out at 2 in the morning, she said. Before hello, before anything. The words of someone who had been holding them since 2 in the morning and was releasing them into the first available vessel. Outside, Kane asked. In his car, lights off, facing the house. She stepped back from the door and he came in. Clementine was at the kitchen table eating cereal with the slow, mechanical motion of someone eating because they knew they were supposed to. She looked up at Kane, then back at her bowl. Deborah stood at the counter with her arms crossed. She had been pretty and was still in the blunted way, but she was more raw than yesterday. Like the second day after something breaks when the initial numbness began to give. I didn't sleep, she said, and then quieter with a glance at Clementine. She was up at 3:30. I found her in the hallway. She had gotten up for the bathroom and heard his car, and she just stood there in the dark. Kane looked at Clementine. The girl was staring at her cereal with total absorption. The kind of absorption that had nothing to do with cereal. Clementine, Kane said. She looked up. What do you do when you hear the car? A pause. She turned her spoon over in her hands. I count. Count what? The time. How long he stays. She set the spoon down. Usually 140 to 160 minutes. Kane looked at Deborah. 2.5 hours more or less every time. How often, he asked Clementine. She thought about it. The fact that she had to think about it, that this had happened enough times to require calculation, was its own complete sentence. Most nights, she said, not all. Which nights is he not there? Another pause. When it rains. He doesn't like the rain. Kane filed that. An operational detail. A man who sat in his car outside a woman's house for 2.5 hours on a regular rotation, but stayed in when it rained. Not impulse, not rage. A program. The consistency of a person who believed in the work. He went to meet Gary Carver that afternoon. The chapter president of Iron Testament Knoxville ran the club the way he had run his infantry squad in the 90s. 53 broad through the shoulders gray beard, kept close eyes the particular flat blue of deep water that did not warm in summer. He had the presidential patch and wore it without ceremony. His office was in the back of the garage on Merchant Street. 2 chairs, a metal desk, a corkboard covered in chapter business, in a code only members understood. Rhett was already in one of the chairs. Kane sat in the other. Carver looked at Kane for a long moment without speaking. He picked up a pen from the desk, turned it between his fingers, a habit that meant he was choosing his words. Tell me what you found, he said. Kane told him. Everything. The girl, the house, the composition book, the 2 failed filings, the text from Dale Tanner 20 minutes after leaving the street. When he was done, Carver sat with it. She's 7, Kane said. I heard you. Carver set the pen down. This isn't what we're talking about. What are we talking about? We're talking about a civilian situation, a neighbor dispute, no criminal charges. We're talking about a man who has done nothing legally that gives us grounds for organized response. If we ride in there and that man or his lawyer frames this as intimidation, as a motorcycle club using physical presence to coerce a neighbor, we lose everything we've spent 15 years building. Every school supply drive, every veterans shelter, every conversation with every county commissioner who has looked at this chapter and decided we're something other than a problem. He paused. That's what we're talking about. Kane was quiet. Here's what I'll authorize, Carver said. Community engagement. We reach out through the Family Services Network. We make it known that Iron Testament has an interest in this family's welfare, officially on record. We offer resources. We offer visibility in the form of ride-bys. Nothing organized enough to look like mobilization. And we start a parallel track with the county attorney's office about the filing situation. How long, Kane asked. Could be weeks. She's been counting nights for 8 months, Kane said. Clementine has been sleeping in a closet for 3. How many more weeks do you want to tell a 7-year-old to count? He stopped himself. The heat in his chest was the heat he was careful with. He pulled it back. I'm not trying to end run you, he said. I'm trying to tell you the timetable this situation is running on is not the timetable that channels and structures run on. Carver sat with that. 3 weeks, he said finally. You do this through proper channels. You keep me informed. If the legal road opens up, you follow it. He met Kane's eyes. That's what I can give you. Kane nodded. He meant it. And Kane. Carver's voice dropped slightly, more deliberate. I understand what this is to you. He paused. Use that understanding. Don't let it use you. Kane looked at the corkboard, the rows of push-pin papers that represented 15 years of work of trust, built with county departments and sheriff's offices and school boards and veteran organizations. He looked at everything Carver had built, and he knew every word of what Carver had said was true, and he sat with the weight of both things at once. He got back to the house on Cutter Road the following morning. Deborah answered quickly. She said quietly, so Clementine could not hear from the living room. He was there again last night, 2 in the morning, an hour and 40 minutes. He's consistent, Kane said. He's always consistent. She poured him coffee. They sat at the kitchen table while Clementine read in her corner. Deborah told him more that morning, the things that had not fit into the first conversation. She told him how it had started. About a year after they had moved in, Tanner had begun stopping at the fence when she was in the yard. Conversations that went too long. Questions about her schedule, her work, her visitors. Then the complaints about noise. Clementine playing in the backyard. He had called the county twice about a child's toys being left out overnight. A child's toys. He understands the system, Kane said. He knows how to use it. He's very smart, Deborah said. That's the thing that keeps me up more than anything else. She looked at her cup. He's not angry. He's not out of control. He is completely, patiently in control. This is a project to him. That word landed in the kitchen the way some words landed, with the specific weight of a truth that could not be softened. He went back to the garage that afternoon and told Rhett what Carver had authorized. Rhett listened and said nothing for a while. Then he said, I talked to Lisa Torrance, and she's aware of the family. Kane, there have been patrol units out to the house 3 times in the last 8 months. Nothing actionable each time. Because he knows, Kane said. Because he knows. Rhett's jaw moved. But Lisa said something else. She said there was a DCS case opened on the family, child welfare, opened about 7 months ago. Kane looked at him. Why didn't Deborah mention it? Rhett looked at the floor. Because it was closed. When? 6 weeks ago. Kane was quiet for a moment. Why? Rhett turned his coffee mug in his hands. Lisa doesn't know exactly. The caseworker is named Monique Okafor. She transferred to a different county the week after she closed the file. The week after. The week after. Rhett looked up. Lisa said the transfer was processed by a deputy administrator named Gary Lund. Kane waited. Gary Lund's wife is Nancy, nee Tanner. The name moved through the room the way a stone moved through still water. Not with violence, with the particular displacement of something that had been there all along, just under the surface, and was now visible. Kane set his cup down. Tanner's sister, he said. Rhett nodded once. They sat with that. A DCS case opened on the family, a case that should have stayed open, a case that had been assigned to a worker who had closed it and transferred away. The same week a transfer processed by the husband of the woman who was Dale Tanner's own sister. Not conspiracy in any dramatic sense, not a room full of people plotting, just the quiet, accumulated machinery of a man who had spent years building exactly the right debts in exactly the right places. Small favors, each one individually explainable, each one individually deniable. Together, something else entirely. How deep does it go? Kane asked. I don't know yet, Rhett said. Enough to lose a DCS case. Enough to lose a DCS case. Enough to lose a protective order filing. Rhett looked at him. That's what I'm trying to find out. Kane looked at the wall of the garage, at the exposed brick, and the tool hooks, and the calendar from an auto parts company. He thought about Deborah's face when she had described the second filing. The way she had spread her hands on the table. The helplessness and the fury mixed together and going nowhere. He knows somebody, she had said. I don't know who. Now he knew. Kane made a call that evening from the parking lot. A man named Omari Riggs, road captain of a chapter out of Birmingham 4 hours south. Kane had met him at a veterans charity ride 3 years ago. Riggs had organized a 300-rider escort for a veteran's funeral when the man's own family had not shown up. He had said over bad coffee afterward, "You want to do something real? You call me." Kane called him now. Riggs picked up on the second ring. "It's Gallagher," Kane said. "Knoxville." Kane. Riggs's voice was the voice of the Deep South, slow and broad and economical. "What do you need?" Kane looked at the empty parking lot. "I need to know how many riders you can reach in a week." A pause. "Depends on the reason." "There's a little girl," Kane said. 7 years old. She hasn't slept in 5 days. There's a man next door who comes at night, and the law can't touch him because he knows where all the lines are." He stopped. "Let it be enough." It was enough. "She needs to know she's not alone," Kane said. The silence on the line was not empty. It was the silence of a man who knew without being told what the specific shape of those words meant. Omari Riggs had his own walls, his own accumulated nights, his own reasons for the road. "Give me 3 days," Riggs said. "How many?" "Enough," Riggs said. "You call this, they'll come." Kane ended the call. He stood in the parking lot for a moment. The heat was past its peak, now evening coming in, throwing long orange light across Merchant Street, and the bar sign down the block, and the ordinary life of the city moving through its ordinary hours. His phone buzzed. An unknown number, not Tanner's number from before. A different unknown. The text said, "We know what you're doing. Stop now, or what happens next is on you." Kane read it twice. He thought about the first text, "I know who you are." He thought about the escalation pattern of a man who had spent 8 months building an architecture of quiet terror, patient and deliberate, and who was now responding to a perceived threat to that architecture. The message was different from the first one. The first one had been a test, a probe for panic. This one was a warning. Kane thought about a 7-year-old sitting on a curb at a gas station, counting the nights she had not slept. He put the phone back in his cut pocket and walked inside. The call from Gary Carver came at 6:47 the next morning. Kane was already awake, had been awake since 4, sitting at his kitchen table with Deborah Armstrong's composition book, reading through the entries for the 3rd time. Not because he needed to read them again, because reading them was the closest thing he had to being useful at 4 in the morning, when there was nothing actionable yet, and the waiting was its own specific wait. He answered on the second ring. "My office," Carver said. "Now. Not 6:30. Not this evening. Now." Kane closed the composition book. "How bad?" he asked. "Now, Kane." The line went dead. He was on Merchant Street in 11 minutes. The garage lot was empty except for Carver's truck and Rhett's bike, and a third vehicle Kane did not immediately recognize. A white Ford pickup with county plates, the kind that belonged to someone who worked somewhere official. Kane sat on his bike for a moment, looking at those plates. Then he went in. The back office held 3 people. Carver behind his desk with his pen in hand, face doing nothing. A man Kane did not know, 50s heavy through the middle, the institutional complexion of someone who lived under fluorescent light, sitting with a manila folder on his knee, and Lisa Torrance from Community Services, standing by the corkboard with her arms crossed, the controlled expression of a woman holding something that wanted to spill. Kane looked at the man with the folder. "Who are you?" "Sit down," Carver said. Kane sat. The man with the folder opened it, removed a single sheet, placed it on the desk facing Kane. A record. Department of Children's Services. A case file summary with headers and case numbers, and the bureaucratic language of institutional documentation. Kane's eyes went to the name at the top. Armstrong Clementine. Date of birth. Case number. Date opened. 11 months ago. He looked up. "There's an open DS case," he said. "There was," Lisa said. Her voice was tight. "Past tense, as of 6 weeks ago." "Why past tense?" Kane asked. The man with the folder, who Kane had placed as county administration somewhere above Lisa's level, shifted in his chair. The case was closed following a review that determined insufficient grounds for continued involvement. Kane looked at him. "The child sleeps in a closet because a man parks outside her house for 2.5 hours most nights. The mother has 6 months of documented harassment in a composition book that a deputy dismissed in 2 minutes. The mother filed twice for a protective order, and both times something went wrong with the paperwork. The man closed the folder. I can tell you that the caseworker who closed the file— I'd like her name, Kane said. The man looked at Carver. Carver looked at Kane. The case was closed by a worker named Monique Okafor, Carver said, who has since transferred to a different county. Lisa unfolded a piece of paper she had been holding against her arm. Monique Okafor transferred to McMinn County, effective 6 weeks ago, the week after she closed the Armstrong file. She looked at Kane. Her transfer was processed by a deputy administrator named Gary Lund. The room went quiet. Kane sat with that sentence. The way it landed, not as shock, as confirmation of a pattern he had been reading for days. Gary Lund, whose wife was Nancy Lund, née Tanner, Dale Tanner's sister. Not coincidence, not friction, design. A DCS worker closes a case that should have stayed open. That same week, she transfers to a different county. The transfer is processed by the brother-in-law of the man who needed the case closed. Each piece individually explainable, each piece individually deniable. Together, the specific architecture of a man who had spent years converting relationships into tools. His sister-in-law, Kane, said. She retired 8 months ago, Lisa said, before the DCS case was open. But the network she built when she was there, the relationships, the understandings, those don't retire when a person does. How deep does this go? Kane asked. Carver looked at him for a long moment. Deep enough that everything we try through official channels is going to hit something before it reaches anyone who can act on it. Which is why he's here, Kane said, looking at the man with the folder. Carver nodded slightly. His name is Walter Ames. He's with the county auditor's office. He's been running a separate audit of DCS transfer irregularities for the past 4 months. Nothing to do with Dale Tanner, originally, Kane asked. Not originally, Ames said carefully. He had the voice of a man whose professional survival depended on saying only what he could document. But the pattern of case closures connected to the Lund network over the past 3 years is not random. How long before you have something actionable? Kane asked. A pause. Realistically, several months. Kane stood up. He walked out before Carver could stop him. He stood in the parking lot for 5 minutes. The morning was overcast, the first real cloud cover in weeks. The light flat and gray and a degree cooler than the heat that had been sitting on the city since June. He could smell rain somewhere to the west. Not here yet. Coming. He checked his phone. Red had made 16 contacts overnight. The network was moving. He went back inside. Ames and Lisa were gone. Carver was alone, the pen in his hands again, turning it. You already started the network, Carver said. It was not a question. Yes. How far along? 16 chapters contacted. Preliminary commitments from 9. Carver looked at his desk. His jaw moved. Not anger exactly, something more complicated. The expression of a man processing a violation of something he had built and believed in, trying to hold the violation and the reason for it in the same frame at once. You went around me, he said. After I watched a man we have now confirmed has a network inside county administration, Kane said. After I found out there's an auditor who needs several months to build a case that might go somewhere. After I found out a DCS case was closed by a worker who transferred the week after processed by the brother-in-law of the man who needed it closed. He paused. I went around you because the channels you told me to use are the channels he owns. Carver was quiet. The fluorescent light in the ceiling had a faint flicker, the kind of thing you noticed once and then could not stop noticing. I know what I did, Kane said. I'm not pretending otherwise. You tell me to hand in my patch, I'll hand it in. But I'm not going to stop what's in motion. A very long silence. What do you need from me? Carver said. Kane looked at him. Sheriff's Department contact. Someone who isn't connected to the Lund network. Someone clean. I have one candidate, Carver said. Her name is Loretta Blackwood. She's been with the department 8 years. Worked to organize crime before she transferred here. Keeps to herself. Doesn't owe anything to the old structure. Set up a meeting, Kane said. Carver set his pen down. This isn't a raid, Kane. Whatever you're building, It better not be a raid. It's not, Kane said. Here's what I need you to understand. We're going there to be seen. However many riders, in daylight, on their best behavior. The only message we're sending is this family is not alone and you are being watched. He met Carver's eyes. That's it. That's the whole thing. Carver held his gaze. That's the whole thing, he repeated, flat, skeptical. If Tanner doesn't fold under the pressure, if he escalates, if he files a complaint, we deal with that. But I've been looking at this man for days. He does what he does because the systems around him protect him, as long as he stays inside certain lines. The moment those systems stop being reliable, the moment he looks out his window and sees that the thing he built his confidence on is gone, he folds. Carver sat with that. Men like him, Kane said, are only as strong as the invisibility they depend on. Carver picked up his pen and put it down again. Get me Blackwood's number, Kane said. He met Rhett at a diner on the east side at noon, the kind of place that had been there since the 70s, and looked it. Vinyl booths, laminate tables, ceramic mugs thick enough to survive a generation. The kind of place where nobody looked up when two men in road cuts came in and sat down. Rhett had his phone on the table. The screen was busy with a chain of notifications. 23 chapters, he said without preamble. Southeast almost fully committed. Mid-Atlantic coming in fast. Word is moving faster than I expected. He turned the phone over. Then I got a call this morning from a man named Kendrick Vaughn, road captain, Appalachian Brotherhood chapter out of Asheville. He heard through the network what we're building, wanted to add riders. Rhett picked up his coffee, set it down. He also wanted to tell me something. Kane waited. He said to tell your man in Knoxville that Dale Tanner has a prior. Not a conviction, a prior. Kane's hand went still on his mug. Kendrick Vaughn's sister lives in Maryville, Rhett said. Same town where Deborah Armstrong is originally from. She had a neighbor about 8 years ago. Single mother, 2 kids. Tanner was renting next door. He stopped. Looked at the table. Same pattern, Kane said. Same pattern, same behavior. The neighbor filed. Nothing went anywhere. And then Rhett looked at the table. The neighbor took her kids and moved overnight, left most of her stuff. Kane said nothing for a moment. She told Kendrick's sister that something happened the night before she left. Rhett's voice was careful, now controlled. That Tanner had gotten into her house somehow. She woke up and he was in the hallway outside her children's room. He didn't touch anything, didn't speak, just stood there. When she turned the light on, he walked out the front door. The diner noise ran on around them. The clatter of plates, the murmur of other conversations, the bell above the door. Kane looked at a spot on the table. Just stood there, he said, in the dark, outside her children's door. Not touching anything, not speaking, just being there, inside the locked space that was supposed to be safe, demonstrating with the absolute economy of a man who knew exactly what he was communicating. I can be anywhere. And then walking out because the message had been sent. She moved the next morning, Rhett said. I know. Kane sat with it. The woman from Maryville had been the iteration before Deborah Armstrong. She had escaped, if escaped was the right word for leaving everything you owned in the middle of the night because staying felt like a worse outcome than starting over with nothing. She had escaped and Tanner had simply reset, found a new house, a new wall to whisper through, a new woman to document, and a new set of officials to dismiss. We need to find her, Kane said. Kendrick is already trying. She's been hard to locate. She's been careful about where she lives. Rhett said the last words in a way that communicated their full weight. A woman who had been so thoroughly taught the lesson of unavoidable presence that she had made herself as unfindable as possible in the years since. Does Kendrick trust us enough to send riders? He trusts the network. Rhett paused. He said his guys have been waiting for a reason like this for a long time. He said to tell you the reason they're coming isn't just for Clementine. It's for the woman from Maryville and whoever came before her. Kane looked at his coffee. He thought about the pattern. Not a man who had fixated on one family, a program, a moving thing with a history that stretched back through years. and women and children who had learned to count in the dark and then been made to disappear themselves to stay safe. And whatever Ames had in his audit folder, whatever Blackwood might build toward if Tanner walked away from this situation intact, he would simply find the next street, the next yellow house, the next child who would learn to count. "We need to find the woman from Maryville," Kane said again. He rode out to the Armstrong house that afternoon. Deborah came to the door faster than she had the first day. The lock still moved with the same efficiency, but there was something different in her face. Something had shifted in the balance between fear and something harder. She poured coffee. Clementine was in the living room with her books, giving them the privacy of her deliberate absorption. "I've been thinking," Deborah said, "about what you told me, about Nancy Lunn." Kane waited. "I keep going back to the second filing," she said. "When I submitted it, the clerk was very friendly, very helpful. He told me it had been received and would be processed." She stopped. "His name was Clifton. I didn't get his last name." She looked at her cup. "Do you think he was the one?" "It's possible," Kane said. She absorbed that. "Then every person who was supposed to help, every system I was supposed to trust." She stopped again. "I keep thinking about Clementine's drawing, the house with real curtains." Kane looked at the window behind its blanket. "She doesn't know she drew it that way," Deborah said. "As a wish. She just drew a house. But I know. I know every choice she made without knowing she was making it." Kane thought about what he carried that he had not said to anyone in 30 years. He thought about it rising in him the way it rose sometimes, when he was sitting in exactly the right kind of dark, and he looked at Deborah Armstrong, sitting at her kitchen table with her coffee, and her composed expression, and the specific kind of courage it took to still be sitting at this table after 8 months, and he said, "I know what it is to be afraid in a house where the walls aren't safe." She looked at him, the assessing look, the one that did not miss much. He said, "When I was young, in the house I grew up in, there was something that went on for a long time that nobody stopped, not the neighbors, not the school, not anyone who should have." He stopped. The words were strange in his mouth, not because he had not thought them, but because he had spent so many years not saying them. "I know what Clementine draws when she draws real curtains. I know what she's asking for." Deborah was quiet for a long moment. She looked at her hands on the table. Then she said, "You turned around at the gas station because of that." "Yeah," she nodded. "Just once. Not pity, not gratitude, something more like understanding. The recognition of a person who had been very alone in a specific kind of experience and had just met someone who knew the room from the inside." From the living room, the small sound of a page turning. "I'm meeting with a detective tonight," Kane said. "Loretta Blackwood. She's been watching Tanner's phone for 2 months. She might have something." Deborah looked up. 2 months. Kane nodded. "She's been watching him all this time," Deborah said slowly. "And no one told me." "I know." He did not try to explain it. Some things did not benefit from explanation. "She's going to help us?" Deborah asked. "I don't know yet," Kane said, "but she has information. And I think she's the kind of person who uses information to do something rather than to make herself feel like she's done something." He met Loretta Blackwood that evening at a bar on the north side, the kind Carver used for meetings that needed to not look like meetings. She was 42, compact with the stillness of a woman who had spent years listening to dangerous people talk. She wore civilian clothes, jeans, a dark jacket, and had chosen a corner booth with sightlines to both the door and the bar. She had been there before Kane arrived. He noticed, and she noticed that he noticed. "Carver says you have information about the Lund network," she said. "No small talk." "I have a thread," Kane said. "I don't have the whole cloth." "Tell me the thread." He told her everything. The Armstrong case, Monique Okafor's transfer, Gary Lund, Nancy Lunn nee Tanner, the protective order filings, the pattern of administrative failures that each individually look like friction and together look like design. He told it in sequence, stripped of interpretation. Blackwood listened without writing anything down. When he was done, she picked up her water glass, set it down. "Walter Ames," she said. "You know him." "I know his audit." She looked at Kane directly. I've known about the Lund connection for 5 months. The Ames audit is focused on financial irregularities. The DCS transfers are a secondary finding. He's not going to move on this in a time frame that helps your situation. Kane waited. If I take what you brought me and add it to what I already have, she said, I can start building a real case. But you need to understand that an official case has a timeline. And if you do what I think you're building toward before I have enough to act on, you could blow the whole thing. 100 bikers riding into that neighborhood gives Tanner and his network a story to tell about organized intimidation that muddies everything I'm trying to build. How long for your case? Kane asked. If everything moves perfectly, 6 weeks. Minimum. The bar noise filled the silence. A jukebox in the corner playing something old and low. There was a woman in Maryville, Kane said. 8 years ago. Same pattern. She left overnight. She's been hard to find ever since. He let that sit. 6 weeks from now or 6 months from now, if Tanner walks away from this situation because we applied pressure without completing the legal case, he finds someone else. The woman from Maryville and whoever came before her stay shadows. And whoever comes next never gets even what Deborah Armstrong has, which isn't much, but it's at least a record. Blackwood was quiet. Then visibility is legal, she said finally. A public gathering on a public road, organized, documented, demonstrably peaceful. If I have a deputy on site to serve as official witness to the fact that nothing illegal is occurring, it doesn't muddy the evidentiary waters. It potentially adds to them, creates a documented record of community concern. She paused. But one thing goes wrong. One rider does one thing that can be framed as threatening. One interaction with Tanner that he can characterize as intimidation. And I lose what I have. Nothing will go wrong, Kane said. You can guarantee that for however many riders you're building toward. I can guarantee the people I've called. They're men who've been in situations where one wrong move ended everything. Blackwood looked at him for a long moment. And the others, the ones in the network you don't personally know. Kane thought about this carefully. About the chain moving across 8 states about Kendrick Vaughn in Asheville, who had said his guys had been waiting for a reason. Men waiting for a reason. That was right and necessary. It was also something that needed managing. Men who had been carrying things for a long time, when the moment finally came, sometimes carried them harder than the moment required. I'll make it clear, Kane said, what this is and what it isn't. Make it very clear, Blackwood said. She stood, dropped a bill on the table for the water. One more thing. The text Tanner sent you from his phone after you visited the Armstrong house. Kane looked at her. You're surprised I know about it. Tanner's phone has been on a soft monitor for 2 months, part of the audit's parallel track. She looked at him with those professional eyes. He texted 3 people that afternoon. You the relative at the road? And a number we haven't been able to fully attribute. It goes through a relay. The content of the third text was different from the other. Different how? Blackwood buttoned her jacket. The text to you said he knew who you were. The text to the relative was logistics. The third text said only, the biker knows about the filing. Contingency may be needed. Kane went still. Contingency, he said. We don't know what that means yet. Could be legal. Could be someone he uses for legal matters. She paused. But I need you to understand something, Mr. Gallagher. You've been assuming this is a man who stays inside the lines. The word contingency suggests he has a line he's considered crossing. She moved toward the door, stopped. I'll have a deputy at the road when you do this. Give me 48 hours notice. She left. Kane sat in the corner booth and turned the word over. Contingency. He turned it the way you turned an unfamiliar object in your hands, feeling for edges and weight. 8 months of documented harassment and the record showed nothing overtly violent. That was deliberate. The whole architecture of his behavior was designed around the line, positioned just inside it. But he had texted someone about contingency, which meant the line was there in his awareness, not as an absolute, but as a considered boundary. Something he had stayed on the right side of, because it served his purposes to do so. Not because he couldn't, Kane picked up his phone and called Rhett. Where are we on finding the woman from Maryville? Kendrick's contact found an address in Georgia, Rhett said. But she won't come forward. She has children, a life she's rebuilt. She talked to Kendrick. Did she say what happened that last night? A pause. She said he got into her house. She doesn't know how. She woke up at 2 in the morning and found him standing in the hallway outside the room where her children slept. A beat of silence. He didn't touch anything Rhett said. Didn't speak, just stood there. When she turned the light on, he walked out the front door. Kane pressed the phone against his ear. The bar's jukebox shifted to something slower. He sat with the image of a man standing in the dark hallway of a locked house outside children's rooms, saying nothing, touching nothing, just being there inside the space that was supposed to be safe, demonstrating without words the only message that needed to be delivered. I can be anywhere, Reddy said. The locks on the Armstrong house. Did either of us actually look at them? Check the hardware itself? A silence. No, Rhett said slowly. We didn't. I need you to call Deborah. Right now. Tell her to check every lock, every window. Tell her to do it quietly, not alarm Clementine, but check every entry point and make sure there's no sign that... His phone buzzed against his ear. A second call interrupting. He pulled the phone away and looked at the screen. Unknown number. Not Tanner's numbers from before. A different one. He switched over. Yeah. Silence for a second. Then a woman's voice, not Deborah, a voice he did not recognize, strained with the specific tension of someone making a call they had been afraid to make for days. Is this Kane Gallagher? Who is this? My name is Monique Okafor, she said. Kane's hand tightened on the phone. The DCS worker. The one who had closed Clementine's case and transferred to McMinn County the week after. I've been trying to decide whether to call for 3 days, she said. Her voice was doing something complicated, controlling something, keeping something from spilling over. I heard that someone was asking questions about the Armstrong case. I'm asking questions, Kane said. I closed that case, she said. I need you to know why. Kane said nothing. Waiting. I closed it because Gary Lund called me into his office and told me the situation had been evaluated and didn't meet the threshold for ongoing intervention. He had paperwork. A secondary review attached to the file. I'd never seen a secondary review appear that fast. It usually takes weeks. This one appeared in the file overnight. It said the child was thriving and the mother had no credible claim of... She stopped, drew a breath. I was new, 2 years in. I'd never seen the process used like that before. I went along with it. What made you call me? Kane asked. A longer silence. I have a daughter, she said. She's 6. Her voice broke slightly. She got it back. When I heard someone was asking the right questions, I thought about my daughter. And I thought about the fact that I closed a file on a 7-year-old because a man told me to. And I was new, and I went along with it. She paused. I have documentation. I kept copies. The secondary review that appeared overnight. I have the metadata from the file system. The timestamp shows it was entered at 3:47 in the morning. Nobody creates official case documentation at 3:47 in the morning. Kane stood up from the booth. Where are you? I'm at home, in McMinn County. Don't go anywhere. Don't talk to anyone at the county. Send the documentation to this number. Photograph it and send it. He gave her his number. And Miss Okafor, whatever you do tonight, don't use your work email. Don't contact anyone at DCS or county administration. There are people in that structure you cannot trust right now. A pause. How many? I don't know yet, Kane said, but enough. He ended the call. His thumb was already moving to Blackwood's number when his phone buzzed again. Rhett. He switched over, yeah. Rhett's voice was different. The working stillness gone something underneath it. What Kane said. I just called Deborah. She's not answering. Kane went cold. Called twice, Rhett said. No answer. Texted. Nothing. How long since her last communication? She texted this morning, around 8. It's 9:35. Rhett's voice was controlled, but barely. I'm 12 minutes from the house. I'm going. I'm 15, Kane said. Go. Don't wait for me. Call me when you have eyes on the house. He was already moving through the bar toward the door, hand on his cut, the cold thing moving through his system the way it had in the field. The particular coldness of a situation going wrong faster than the plan could compensate. He was through the door and on the bike in 30 seconds. The engine caught and he pulled out of the parking lot without looking, the headlight cutting the early dark, the first drops of rain starting against his face as he opened the throttle. The rain. He had noted it as an operational detail. Tanner did not come when it rained, which meant if he had come tonight, he had come before the rain started. Had been dry all day until now, which meant if Tanner had moved, he had moved in the window before the weather changed. The window that had just closed. Kane rode 12 minutes doing 70 on the county road. The rain coming harder now, the headlight catching the drops and turning them silver in the dark. His phone buzzed against his chest. He could not answer at speed. It buzzed again. Rhett's name on the display, and he pulled to the gravel shoulder, brakes the bike fishtailing slightly on the wet road before it stopped. He answered. "She's okay," Rhett said. Breath first, then the words. "She's okay. Clementine's okay." Kane pressed the phone against his ear and said nothing. "Her phone died," Rhett said. "Charger cord was damaged. She's been without a phone all day. She didn't know we'd been trying." Kane sat on the idling bike in the rain. The drops ran down his face and into the collar of his jacket. "The house is fine," Rhett said. "Locked up. She was in the kitchen. Clementine was on the tablet." A pause. "Kane. She looked at me when I came in and she said, did something happen?" And I told her, "No, just checking in." And she said, Rhett stopped for a moment. She said, "You're the first person who's come to check on us in the evening. Everyone else comes during the day." Kane closed his eyes. Everyone else came in daylight, in office hours, in the organized time of official structures. The nights had always been Deborah's alone. "Tell her I'm getting her a phone tonight," Kane said. "A new one. And tell her I need her to check every lock, every window, every entry point." He paused. "Tell her about the woman from Maryville. She needs to know what he's capable of." The silence from Rhett was the particular silence of a man who understood what was being asked and knew it was necessary and did not want to be the person who had to say it. Rhett, Kane said, "I'll tell her. Stay until you get there." Kane ended the call, sat for a moment in the rain on the county road, with the engine idling and the rain running off the chrome of the handlebars in small rivers. His phone buzzed. Documentation from Monique Okafor. 11 photographs of papers, the metadata visible in each shot. He looked at the timestamp on the secondary review, 3:47 in the morning. A bureaucratic document manufactured in the middle of the night and inserted into a child's welfare file and used to justify closing a case that should have stayed open. Not legal exactly in any way anyone could demonstrate without the metadata, but real, documentable. The fingerprint left by someone in a hurry, someone who believed the system would absorb it the way it had absorbed everything else. Kane put the bike in gear and pulled back onto the road. He reached the Armstrong house in 4 minutes. Rhett's bike was parked out front, the lights of the house all on through the edges of the blankets. Tanner's truck was in his driveway, normal position, had not moved. Kane went to the front door, knocked. Deborah opened it with a new phone already in her hand, the one Rhett had apparently produced from somewhere. A prepaid, practical immediate. She looked at Kane. "Did Rhett tell you about Maryville?" He nodded. She was quiet for a moment. Then, "Show me where she said. Not the story. Show me what he did to get in." Kane looked at her. She was standing very straight. Her eyes were doing the flat, controlled thing, but underneath it something had hardened. Not rage, not despair. Something cooler and more deliberate than either. They went through the house together. Kane examined every exterior door, every window. The front door locks were standard deadbolts, solid. The back door had good hardware too. He checked the kitchen window behind its blanket, the bathroom window, the small frosted glass window in the back bedroom. All locked, all intact. Then he found it. The window in the utility room off the kitchen. The latch had the particular quality of hardware that looked intact from a casual inspection, but moved slightly differently when you press the frame from outside. A quarter inch of give where there should not be any. He came back in and looked at it from the inside, and the latch's catch was seated, but the housing around it had been very slightly damaged. The kind of damage that came from a tool applied with patience and care, leaving no visible marks but compromising the mechanism. It had not been forced. It had been worked gradually over multiple visits until it would yield to the right pressure from outside. Deborah was standing in the doorway watching him. "This one," Kane said. "How long?" she asked. He could not know for certain. Based on the wear to the housing, weeks at least. The work of someone who understood that the goal was not to break in dramatically, but to prepare an exit that looked like it had never been touched. Deborah looked at the window for a long moment. Then she went to the kitchen and came back with a screwdriver and a piece of hardware she had gotten from a drawer that had probably been holding miscellaneous things for years. She replaced the window latch herself, quietly, efficiently, the hands of a woman who had been doing everything herself for a long time. When she was done, she said, "He's been ready. This whole time. He's been ready to come in, and he was just waiting for the right night." "Yeah," Kane said. She put the screwdriver back in the drawer, turned to look at him. "How soon?" she asked. Kane thought about the network. 31 chapters, commitments building. Kendrick Vaughn's writers coming from Asheville. Omari Riggs's column from Birmingham. All the chapters in between that Red had reached in 3 days of calls, and the calls those calls had generated. He thought about Blackwood. 48 hours notice. 3 days, Kane said. Maybe 2. She looked at him. "That's soon. It has to be soon," he said. She absorbed that. "Then he'll know something's coming before it gets here. He always knows." Kane thought about the network, about the scope of it, the way it moved through states, in chapters, in contexts. About a man who had a monitored burner phone and a county clerk on his payroll and a retired deputy administrator for a sister-in-law. "Maybe," Kane said, "but there's a difference between knowing something is coming and knowing how much of it is coming." He drove back to the garage that night. Rhett was already there. They sat outside on the bench in the rain, which had gone from a shower to something steadier. And Kane told Rhett what he had found with the utility room window. Rhett was quiet for a long time after. "He was going to come in," Rhett said. He had already prepared to, Kane said. Whether he was planning to do it tonight or next week or some specific night he had calculated as optimal, he had the capacity, had been building it. So if we're 3 days out and he knows the network is moving, he might try to move first, Kane said. They sat with that. "What do we do?" Red asked. "We don't leave her alone at night," Kane said. "Not until this is over. I'll take the first watch. You take tomorrow." Rhett nodded. He did not ask questions about logistics. He was the kind of man who, when a decision was made, moved to the execution without ceremony. Kane called Deborah and told her. She was quiet for a moment. "You don't have to do that," she said. "I know," Kane said. A longer pause. "Where will you be?" "On the street, in front of the house. You won't see me, but I'll be there." She absorbed that. Then quietly, so that Clementine would not hear, "Thank you." He sat in front of the Armstrong house that night until 2 in the morning. Dale Tanner's truck was in the driveway the whole time, lights off, engine off, the deliberate stillness of a man who understood how to use presence as pressure. At 1:43 it started. At 1:51 it backed out of the driveway slowly and moved down the street toward the county road. Kane watched it go. He stayed until 3. Then he rode home through the rain-wet streets of Knoxville, the roads gleaming under the streetlights, the city quiet and ordinary on all sides, the way cities were quiet at 3 in the morning. All the damage and the care and the ordinary courage happening inside the walls and out of sight. He checked his phone. Monique Okafor's documentation had come in. 11 photographs. He looked at the timestamps again. He forwarded everything to Loretta Blackwood with a message that said, 48 hours. The next morning, he told Gary Carver everything. Not just the network, everything. The window in the utility room. Monique Okafor's call. The Maryville woman. The contingency text. He told it like a field report stripped of interpretation, just what he had observed and what he had concluded. Carver sat behind his desk and listened without moving until Kane was done. "You're telling me he's been preparing to go inside the house," Carver said. "I'm telling you he had the capacity," Kane said. "Whether he was planning to use it is something I can't know. What I can tell you is that a man who went to the trouble of compromising a window latch over weeks was not doing it without intention." Carver picked up his pen and set it down. His jaw moved. Then he said, "How many riders do you have committed?" 43 confirmed, Kane said. "More coming." "Make it happen," Carver said. Kane looked at him. "I looked at what you brought me," Carver said. "The audit, the DCS case, the filing, the window." He paused. "I thought about a 7-year-old girl drawing a house with real curtains." He looked at the corkboard. "We're Iron Testament. We were founded on the idea that the law isn't the only form justice can take. We built 15 years of partnerships and charity runs and school supply drives to prove we understood the difference between justice and violence." He met Kane's eyes. "This is the difference. What you're building is the difference. Go do it." Kane nodded once. He stood. "One thing," Carver said. Kane turned. "You told me you'd hand in your patch." Carver looked at him steadily. "I'm telling you to keep it. We need you in it." Kane walked out into the morning. He called Omari Riggs from the parking lot. "How many can you bring?" "I'll be there with 47, Riggs said. "And that's just my chapter. Kendrick's people are 42. The rest of the network is asking me what time." "Day after tomorrow," Kane said. "I'll send you the address." "Be there," Riggs said. In a county building, Clifton Reese sat at his desk and looked at the message Tanner had sent him, and looked at the reply he had sent back, and thought about the 3 years of small favors that had brought him to this desk, at this moment, looking at this message. And he thought about the word Tanner had used in a follow-up text that morning, necessary. He thought about the word unnecessary. He thought about the difference. He sat for a long time. Then he picked up his phone and called a number he had not called in a long time. A number that was not Dale Tanner's. The evening of the gathering came in with rain. Not the scattered drops of the night before, but the full commitment of a Tennessee summer storm. The kind that turned the roads dark and made the air smell like wet clay and pine and something older than either. Kane rode out to Cutter Road at 8:45 through a downpour that put rivers in the gutters and turned the beam of his headlight into a cone of silver and moving water. He had told himself this would be orderly. He had told Rhett it would be orderly. He had told Omari Riggs and Kendrick Vaughn and every road captain he had personally spoken to that this was not a show of force, not an act of intimidation, not anything that could be framed as aggression. He had said, "We are going to a dead-end street, and we are going to be present, and we are going to be seen, and that is the totality of what we are doing." He believed that. He also believed that what happened in the next few hours was not entirely within his control, because the nature of things that had built enough momentum was that they sometimes went where they needed to go, rather than where they were directed. He turned onto Cutter Road. The first thing he saw was Dale Tanner's truck in his driveway, with the engine still warm, rain hissing on the hood. The second thing he saw was the light in the Armstrong house, not the diffuse glow of interior lights behind the blankets over the windows. A moving light, directed, the kind that moved with the focused quality of a handheld flashlight being used inside a room where the ceiling lights were not on. Kane killed his headlight before the thought finished. He was off the bike before it stopped moving, boots hitting the wet gravel at the edge of the road, his body running on something older and more reliable than thought. The distance to the front door, 14, 15 yards, the rain loud against everything. The front door with its 3 locks. He hit it with his shoulder. The frame cracked, but held. He hit it again, and it gave the deadbolt tearing through the aging wood, and he was inside. The flashlight beam swung toward him from the hallway. A man's shape big through the middle, more substantial than the black truck in the beige house had suggested. Dale Tanner, 49 Contractor Municipal Parks. standing in the hallway of a house he had not been invited into, holding a flashlight like a wand, the beam swinging to catch Kane full in the face. Kane stepped left out of the beam, letting his eyes adjust to the indoor dark. Deborah was against the wall near the kitchen doorway, standing not on the floor, standing which was the only thing that mattered in that second. Her face was pale and completely still in the flashlight's bleed arms, flat against the wall, everything about her posture communicating a woman who had gone completely interior, all available energy directed toward not making a sound that would carry down the hallway to the closet. The closet door at the end of the hall, closed. Clementine inside. "Get out of my house," Deborah said. Her voice did not shake. It was the flattest thing Kane had ever heard a human voice produce. The voice of a woman who had been afraid for so long she had come out the other side of it into something cold and specific. Tanner did not move. He was looking at Kane now with the flashlight extended, using it as both tool and barrier. The thing that struck Kane most was his expression. He was calm. Not the manufactured calm of someone suppressing panic, the genuine occupational calm of a man doing a job he had done before, or that he had prepared for a very long time. "You broke her door," Tanner said. "Conversational. That's criminal damage." Kane crossed the distance in 2 steps and took the flashlight out of Tanner's hand in a movement that was not violent but was absolute. A twist and pull that had the flashlight transferred before Tanner could process the decision to resist. Kane set it on the floor beam toward the wall. Enough light to see, not enough for Tanner to control. Tanner looked at his empty hand, then at Kane. "You just assaulted me," Tanner said. Deborah Kane said without looking away from Tanner. "Go get Clementine. Go to the back bedroom. Stay there." He heard her move, heard the hallway, the closet door, a child's voice, a single syllable cut short, then the bedroom door closing. The two of them stood in the kitchen hallway with the flashlight beam on the wall and the rain loud on the roof. "How did you get in?" Kane said. Tanner's mouth moved, not a smile but using the same muscles. Kane stepped closer, 1 foot of space between them. The heat of the man. "You need to leave," Tanner said. "How did you get in?" "Nothing." Kane stepped closer still. Call them," Kane said. "Call right now. I want them here. I want everything about tonight on a report with your name and my name and Deborah Armstrong's name and the time and the date." He paused. "And I want Loretta Blackwood to get that report on her desk at 8 tomorrow morning." He watched Tanner's face. He watched the name land. Watched something go through it that was not quite fear and not quite recognition, but the space between them where the two overlapped. "You know that name," Kane said. Tanner said nothing. But he did not move toward his phone. "Call," Kane said. "Or leave." From outside, coming through the broken doorframe, through the rain and the dark and the wet Tennessee night, a sound that started low and felt before heard. A vibration more than a noise. Rising. Not one engine. Not two. The sound of a column. Both men heard it at the same time. The organized, deliberate convergence of machines coming down a road together. The kind of sound that only happened when there were many of them and they had a common destination. Tanner's eyes moved toward the broken door, toward the cold, wet air coming through it, carrying that sound. Kane's phone buzzed. He took it out without looking away from Tanner and read the screen. "Rhett, we're here." Not 12 minutes. Not 15. Rhett had been closer than he had said, or he had moved the moment Kane had moved, and the calls he had made on the road had reached people who were already within range because the network had been building toward this for 3 days, and the riders had been quietly converging because that was what happened when the network was properly awake. Kane turned the phone to face Tanner, not showing him the message, showing him the proof of a communication that had already happened, that was already fact, that was already outside the door and coming up the road. The sound built, the rain in the engines mixing the low, rolling approach of the column, moving up Cutter Road headlights sweeping through the broken doorframe in sequences. 1 pause, 2 pause, 3. Each light a separate machine, Each machine a separate person who had driven however far through the rain on a weeknight because the word had come through and the word was right. Tanner turned back to Kane. For the first time since Kane had come through the door, the calm was gone. Not rage, not fear exactly, something that was both at once. The expression of a man whose operating system had just encountered something it was not built to process. Not a lone woman with a composition book. Not a filing that could be lost. Not a caseworker who could be transferred. Just people. Just presence. The accumulated, unstoppable physical fact of phone calls in 3 days of network and every man who had driven through the rain tonight because someone had said she's waiting. What is this? Tanner said quietly. The first unmanaged thing he had said. Kane looked at him. This is what it looks like, he said, when you run out of system. Outside, the first bikes were rolling onto Cutter Road. The headlights laying long bars of light across the wet pavement, the engines dropping to idle in sequence, like a collective breath being slowly released. And then more behind them, and more behind those. The sound building into something that was less noise and more condition. A presence. A force of nature with its own gravity. Boots on the porch. Rhett in the doorframe, rain on his shoulders, looking at Kane, then at Tanner, then back at Kane with a single clear question in his eyes. Kane answered it with a small movement of his head. Not yet. Not like that. From the back bedroom, the sound of a door. Kane turned. Deborah in the hallway, one hand flat against the wall, the other held behind her back. And behind her, at the edge of the doorframe, Clementine. 7 years old in her pajamas, fully awake. She looked not at Tanner, but past him, through the broken doorframe at the lights filling the street outside. Her face did something Kane had not yet seen it do. It opened. Not a smile exactly. Not relief exactly. Something larger and more raw than either. The expression of a child whose nervous system had been running a single program for so long that encountering evidence the program might be wrong produced something close to physical shock. Her mouth was slightly open. Her hands came to the front of her pajama shirt and held it, the small knuckles white, the way children held things when the feeling arrived faster than words. She stepped past her mother into the hallway. Clementine Deborah's hand went out. It's okay, Kane said, to Deborah, then to Clementine. Come here. She walked to him. She stood beside him and looked at Tanner for 1 second, the calculation running, and then she turned toward the door. Are they here for us? She said. All of them, Kane said. She looked at the lights in the street, the rivers of headlights in the wet dark, the engines idling at the low register that was the Brotherhood's natural breath. Her hands loosened on her shirt just slightly. Tanner moved, not toward Kane, toward the door, the only exit, the calculation shifting from confrontation to withdrawal, the read of a man whose system had delivered its final assessment. Rhett moved to block the frame. Tanner stopped. Let him go, Kane said. Rhett looked at him. Let him go. Blackwood has everything she needs. He walks out that door in front of all those witnesses, and it's documented, and it's over for him. He stood and looked at Tanner directly. You understand what's waiting out there. Not just tonight, every night going forward. Every night until Blackwood finishes her case. He paused. You're done here. Tanner looked at Kane. At the door. At the street full of lights. At Clementine standing beside Kane, watching him with the flattest, clearest eyes he would ever look into. He walked out. Rhett stepped aside and Tanner moved through the broken doorframe onto the porch, and the headlights found him. 87 of them, every one of them catching the shape of a man, walking out of a house he had not been invited into, walking in front of every witness on Cutter Road, walking into a visibility that could not be taken back. Kane heard it the second Tanner understood the full scope of what he had walked into. Not engines, not shouting. No one moved. No one said anything. Just the rain and the lights and the organized, witnessed, documented presence of 87 people who had driven through the night to stand on a dead-end road in Tennessee and simply be here, looking at one man saying nothing that needed words. Deputy Sears was at the edge of the column with his cruiser, and Loretta Blackwood stood beside it with her arms folded and her phone in her hand. Recording, documenting, creating the official record that would follow Dale Tanner into every proceeding to come. Tanner stood on the porch in the rain for 11 seconds. Then he walked down the steps into his truck and got in. The engine started. He backed out of his driveway slowly, the way a man moved when he understood that every movement was being witnessed, and he pulled onto Cutter Road, and the column parted for him, not with hostility, not with ceremony, just parted the way water parted for something moving through it. He drove to the end of the road and turned and was gone. The column closed behind him. Someone in the back let out a single, low throttle rev. Not aggressive, not triumphant. The acknowledgement of men who did not have words for things, using the only language they had. Others answered it one by one down the column, until the whole street was briefly alive with the sound of 87 machines saying the same wordless thing at once. Then they went quiet. Clementine, standing in the rain with Kane beside her, looked up at him. "Are they going to stay?" "They'll stay as long as we need," Kane said. She turned back to the street. The lights, the rain moving through the headlight beams in thin silver lines. The sound of the engines at idle, patient and steady. She looked at it all for a long moment, this child who had spent months counting minutes in a closet, who had sat on a curb at a gas station and said 3 words to a stranger because she had run out of anyone else to say them to. She said, "I want to go say thank you." Kane looked at Deborah. Deborah's face was doing multiple things at once. The relief that had not landed yet. The fear still metabolizing, converting slowly into something it had not been before. Underneath both something fragile and new. The face of a woman who had been alone for a very long time and was now encountering the fact that she was not. She nodded. Kane took Clementine's hand and they walked down the porch steps together into the rain, and the column's nearest riders turned to look at them. And the word moved down the line the way words move through a column, not spoken, just transmitted. The small girl in pajamas walking in the rain, holding the biker's hand, moving toward the lights. Omari Riggs, sitting on his idling Road King in the middle of the column, saw it first. A man on a porch in the small circle of light, and beside him, holding his hand, a child in pajamas, standing in the rain, looking at 87 headlights like she was seeing the sun come up for the first time in months. He did not say anything. He did not have to. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The rain came down on all of them equally. Clementine walked up to the nearest rider, a man from Birmingham named Jerome, 46 years old, road veteran, who had left his house that afternoon and driven 4 hours because the word had come through, and the word was right. She looked up at him. "Thank you for coming," she said. Jerome looked at this 7-year-old child in the rain for a moment. Then he said, "We'll always come." She moved to the next rider, and the next. Not all of them. There were too many for that. But she moved down the line for 20 minutes in the rain, this child who had been sleeping in a closet, going from rider to rider, saying the same small words, and every man she said them to sat a little straighter in the saddle and looked at her with the expression of men who had needed a reason like this for a longer time than they had known. Deborah stood on the porch watching. At some point, Kane came to stand beside her. The rain was steady on the roof of the porch overhead. She said, "I don't know how to." "I know," Kane said. She looked at him. "I'm going to cry," she said, "and I'm going to be very embarrassed about it." "Don't be," he said. She laughed, which came out as something between a laugh and the other thing, and she pressed her hand over her mouth for a moment. And Kane stood beside her and said nothing, because sometimes the right thing was to simply be present while someone felt what they had been holding back for 8 months. After a while, she said, "She slept 4 hours last night." "I know," he said. "You texted me." She looked down the column at her daughter, who was still moving from rider to rider in the rain. "I haven't seen her walk like that," Deborah said. "That walk. Like she knows where she's going." Kane watched Clementine. The small straight back, the deliberate steps, the way she looked directly at each person she spoke to. "Yeah," he said. "That's new." 3 weeks later, Dale Tanner was formally served with a protective order. It came out of Loretta Blackwood's case. The metadata from the secondary DCS review, Monique Okafor's documentation, the monitored phone, the burner number traced to a paralegal in the county public defender's office who had been doing off-the-books favors for the Tanner network for 4 years. Gary Lund was placed on administrative leave pending investigation. The paralegal resigned. The protective order was the first visible piece of something larger that Blackwood said would take another year to fully unwind. But it was a real piece. It had Tanner's name on it with official weight behind it. He was out of the house on Cutter Road inside 2 weeks. The beige rancher went on the rental market. The black truck stopped appearing. The tomato plants along the property line went untended and eventually fell over. Clifton Reese had called a number the night before the riders came, a number that turned out to be a line to the county attorney's office. He had given them 3 years of small favors, dates, descriptions, the shape of the system he had been part of without ever quite letting himself name it. It was not enough to guarantee him immunity, but it was enough to get his story on record before someone else told it for him. And the county attorney's office had found it useful in ways he had not fully anticipated. Monique Okafor kept her job in McMinn County. Blackwood had made a call on her behalf, noting that her cooperation had been material and that she had come forward voluntarily when she could have stayed silent. Whether that mattered in the formal process remained to be seen, but it was on record. Kane came to the Yellow House on a Thursday afternoon, the last truly hot day before fall properly arrived, the light going gold and long across the driveway in the field at the end of the street. Deborah was on the porch with 2 cups of coffee, which meant she had seen him coming from inside, which meant she had been watching, which was its own kind of change. She was watching the road now with a different intention. He sat on the step. She sat on the other end. They drank the coffee and watched the light move across the driveway. Lisa Torrance found a housing assistance program, Deborah said. There's a place on the north side. Better school district, actual yard. She looked at her cub. I'm thinking about it. Good school district, Kane said. Yeah, she was quiet. I keep waiting to feel safe like it's supposed to arrive all at once. That's how it works, Kane said. It comes in pieces. She looked at him. Is that from experience? He picked at the paint on the porch step, the butter yellow, peeling in long strips. Yeah. She did not push. He appreciated that. She asked about you, Deborah said. Who? Clementine. She asks if you're coming. Kane looked at the driveway. At the tricycle, which had acquired new streamers since the old ones had come off red, this time bright and unweathered. Tell her yes, he said. Deborah nodded. Let the silence sit for a moment. Then I don't know how to, don't, Kane said. Not unkind. She looked at him. You don't owe me anything, he said. That's not how this works. I know what you risked, she said. Carver told me you could have lost your patch. Didn't, though, which was true. Carver had sat across his desk 3 days after Cutter Road and looked at Kane for a long time and then had said, You got lucky, it went clean. And Kane had said, It went clean because I knew who I was calling. And Carver had sat with that and then said, Don't go around me again. And Kane had said, I won't need to. And that had been the end of it, more or less. She said, I want to ask you something. Go ahead. At the gas station. She looked at the empty road ahead of them. When Clementine told you, he comes at night, you turned around. You didn't have to. You had somewhere to be. Kane looked at the driveway. At the field at the end of the road. At the neighbor's empty beige house. I had a reason to, he said. She waited. He sat for a moment with the decision of whether to say it here, outside in the afternoon light, in the ordinary way of 2 people on a porch. He had said some of it to Red in the dark, on a dead-end road necessity driving the words out of him. He had not said it to anyone else. When I was young, he said, in the house I grew up in, there was something that went on for a long time and nobody did anything about it. Not the neighbors, not the people who were supposed to help. Nobody. He stopped. She was very still beside him. She counted nights the same way I counted them, he said. Same math, same logic. He came at night and everyone who should have helped had already failed her, and she was 7 years old. The afternoon was quiet around them. The street empty, the field at the end of it, going gold in the late light. "So you came back," Deborah said. "Yeah. Because you knew someone should have." Kane looked at the empty house next door at the property line where the tomato plants had been. At the fence, just a fence, now. "Yeah," he said. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "She's going to remember this, all of it. She's going to remember that people came." She looked at him. "That you came." Kane said nothing. He did not think he needed to. The sound of the screen door. Clementine came out in the particular way of a child who had been hovering behind the door long enough to perfect the timing of her entrance, just past the point of being too obvious. She was carrying a book. She sat on the step between them, opened it, and appeared to read. Kane looked at the top of her head, the small concentration of a child performing casual. "Hey," he said. "Hey," she said without looking up. He reached into his cut pocket and produced a pack of Wrigley's he had bought at a gas station on the way over. The deliberate kind of thought he did not examine too closely because it was embarrassing and true. He set it on the step beside her. She looked at it, at him, back at the book. "Thank you," she said. "Yeah." She turned a page. He drank his coffee. Deborah looked at the driveway. The ordinary afternoon moved around them in its ordinary way. After a while, without looking up from the book, Clementine said, "I slept last night, all the way through, without counting." He did not say anything. He did not need to. She turned another page. The gold light moved across the driveway in the long, slow way it moved. At the end of summer, the quality of it that made everything look slightly more permanent than it was. Down the road, the beige rancher sat empty. The tomato cages along the property line were bare. Omari Riggs called the following Sunday from 4 hours south. "How's the family?" he said. "Better," Kane said. "Moving soon." "Good." A pause, the pause of a man choosing words. "I heard from Kendrick, the woman from Maryville. She reached out to him." Kane went still. She saw the story Riggs said. The pictures from the road. "She's not ready to come forward officially, but she talked to Kendrick. She told him what happened. All of it." He stopped. "Kendrick says she cried for about an hour," Riggs said. "And then she said she felt like she could breathe." Kane looked out his kitchen window. The morning, coming in gray and cool, the first real cool of the turning season. The Tennessee summer finally breaking the way it broke every year, not gradually, but in a single morning when you stepped outside and something fundamental had shifted. "That's something," Kane said. "It's a start," Riggs said. "Blackwood's people reached out to her. She might talk to them eventually." He paused. "Kane, what you built, the reason it worked." "It worked because the right people came," Kane said. "They came because you called." Kane did not answer that. He did not think the credit was the point. The point was the woman in Georgia who had spent 8 years breathing carefully and had now maybe breathed differently for 1 hour. The point was Clementine, who had slept through the night without counting. "You riding this weekend?" Riggs asked. "Yeah," Kane said. "I'll be on I-75 around noon Sunday if you want company through Chattanooga." "I'll be there," Riggs said. He rode out Sunday morning, early before the dew had fully burned off the roads. The Harley's engine warming up through the first few miles the way it always did, a gradual loosening the machine coming into itself. The air was different, now, cooler against his face, carrying the first edge of what was coming. Not winter, not yet. The reminder that winter existed, that the heat that had pressed down on Knoxville all summer was not permanent, that things changed. He took Route 9 south, past the intersection with the county road, past the stand of pine trees where he had pulled over the first day, and sat with a half-smoked cigarette and the specific gravity of 3 words that had taken up space in him and refused to leave. The trees looked the same. The road looked the same. The weight that had been there was gone, or not gone exactly, but settled. The way things settled when they had been carried long enough, improperly enough to reach wherever they were going. At a gas station about 4 miles down the road, not Barton's Fill, a different one, he stopped for coffee. The woman behind the counter was 60 or so, gray-haired, with the expression of someone who had been watching people come and go for long enough to find them interesting rather than exhausting. "Big ride today?" she asked, nodding at the cut. "Meeting some friends down toward Chattanooga," Kane said. She handed him the coffee. He paid, started toward the door. "You're one of them, aren't you?" she said. Not a question exactly. "The ones from Cutter Road." He turned. She was looking at him with a particular expression. Not hero worship, something more like recognition. The look of a person who had seen the photographs and understood what they were actually photographs of. "My granddaughter lives 2 streets over," she said. She said she could hear the engines from her house. A pause. She said it sounded like thunder that didn't stop. Kane looked at her. "There were a lot of people who wanted to be somewhere that night," he said. She nodded, turned back to her counter. He walked out into the cool morning air and the smell of coffee and road dust, and the engine waiting for him, patient and familiar. He put on his helmet, settled it, pulled out of the lot onto Route 9, and opened the throttle. The road unspooled ahead of him, clean 2 lanes, the trees on both sides gone gold at the edges, with the first turn of the season. The engine rose into its voice, that low, steady conversation, the dialogue between a man and a machine that had been going on for years and required nothing except forward motion and the willingness to keep going. He thought about Clementine, not the version on the curb at the gas station with the hollow eyes and the 5 days without sleep. The porch version. The version who had walked down the line of riders in the rain saying thank you to each one. The version who had sat beside him with a book and said, "I slept last night all the way through without counting." He thought about what it cost and what it was worth, and found, as he always found, that the calculation landed in the same place. That there were things that cost what they cost, and you either paid them or you did not. And the reasons you did not were always real reasons, and they were also still reasons for not doing the right thing. And that was what you had to be able to live with when the dust settled. He was 30 years past the last time he had told himself to wait. He rode the rest of Route 9, thinking about a girl who had been drawing houses lately. First the house with real curtains. Then 3 days after the night on Cutter Road, the house with a yard and a garden and a path to the door. Deborah had texted him a photograph of that one. He had looked at it for a long time. The garden was new. He had not expected the garden. Somewhere to the south, Omari Riggs was on the interstate coming north, and Rhett was somewhere behind him. And Kendrick Vaughn had mentioned he might come up from Asheville if the weather held. The weather was holding. Kane rode the engines behind him distant and growing the road ahead clear. And somewhere in Knoxville, in a yellow house that would soon be empty for somewhere better, a 7-year-old girl sat in the morning light and turned the pages of a book and breathed in and out in the steady, unremarkable rhythm of a child who had nothing left to count. Just the page, just the light, just the ordinary, hard-won quiet of a morning with nothing in it to fear. That was enough. That was the whole thing. The morning after the night on Cutter Road, Kane sat on his porch until the sun fully cleared the ridge and the neighborhood came into its ordinary daytime self around him. He had not slept more than 2 hours. Not from anxiety, not from the particular restlessness that sometimes followed situations that had gone at high speed, more from the specific quality of aftermath that came when something large had ended and the space it had occupied was still warm from its presence. He thought about the word contingency and what it had meant and what it had not become. He thought about a man backing his truck slowly out of a driveway in front of 87 witnesses and a county deputy and a detective with a phone in her hand, backing out with the deliberate precision of someone who understood that the way you moved in that moment was the last thing you controlled. He thought about the particular look on Tanner's face when the column had not parted for him with hostility, when there had been no shouts, no gestures, nothing that could be characterized as anything except the quiet and documented presence of people on a public road. That had been the calculation. That had been what Carver and Kane had arrived at from different angles, through different nights of different reasoning. The only thing that worked against a man who understood systems was something the systems could not contain. Not violence, not threats, not anything that could be filed and dismissed. Just presence. just the accumulated, organized, witnessed fact of people who were not going to stop being present. He went inside and made coffee and stood at his kitchen window, the way Deborah Armstrong had been standing at her kitchen window behind its blanket for 8 months. And he thought about the difference between those two stances. The same window, the same posture, two entirely different relationships to what was outside. He texted Deborah, "Everything okay this morning?" She texted back inside 90 seconds. "Yes." Clementine asked if she could move her blankets back to her bed. I said yes. Kane looked at that text for a long time. He forwarded the Monique Okafor documentation to Loretta Blackwood with a note that said, "This was what you needed." She replied 20 minutes later with 2 words, "More than." The days that followed had the particular texture of aftermath organizing itself into new patterns. Red had been to the house twice more to do the kind of work that needed doing. The door frame, the latch on the utility room window replaced with a better model, a new deadbolt on the back entry. The kind of work that did not require explanation and did not need to be requested. He had simply appeared with tools and done it, and had coffee with Deborah afterward, and talked to Clementine about the horses in her puzzle, which she had apparently made significant progress on in the days since the night of the column. She was almost done with it, Red had reported. She'd been working at it for weeks, and she'd been stuck at the mountains in the background because the pieces all looked the same from a distance, and you had to look very closely to find the one that fit. But she'd been sitting with it every morning lately and making headway. Kane understood the report for what it was. Not a report about a puzzle. Kendrick Vaughn called the Tuesday after from Asheville, his voice carrying the particular quality of a man who had driven a long way in the rain and did not regret it. "My sister called me," he said. "She said the woman from Maryville called her again. 2 days after everything." Kane waited. "She watched the video," Kendrick said. "Someone in the column had filmed it. The part where Clementine walks down the line. She watched it 3 times. He paused. "She said she'd been waiting for someone to do something since the night she drove away. 8 years of watching. 8 years of thinking maybe she'd been wrong not to stay and fight. And she said she understood now that she hadn't been wrong to leave. She'd made the right call for her kids. But she didn't know until she saw the video that the thing she'd been waiting for was someone else doing the fighting she couldn't do." Kane sat with that for a moment. "She's in Georgia with her kids, and she's fine," Kendrick said. "I want you to know that. She built something good there. Her youngest is in the 7th grade. She coaches his baseball team on Saturdays." "That's something," Kane said. "It's a lot," Kendrick said. "It's the whole thing, actually." He paused again. "She might talk to Blackwood. She's not ready yet, but she's thinking about it. And thinking about it is more than she was doing 2 weeks ago." Kane looked at the wall of his kitchen, at the place where a calendar hung that he kept because it had been a gift from someone in the chapter, and he had never gotten around to replacing it, even though the year on it was 2 years out of date. He thought about 8 years, about a woman in Georgia coaching a baseball team on Saturdays who had watched a video of a child walking a line of bikes in the rain and had called a phone number in the middle of the night because she needed to tell someone that she had been waiting. "Tell her she doesn't have to decide anything yet," Kane said. "Tell her there's no timeline. Tell her Blackwood's number isn't going anywhere." "I'll tell her," Kendrick said. They talked for another 20 minutes about the ride back to Asheville, about the weather, about a fundraising run the Appalachian Brotherhood was organizing for the fall, about the particular quality of the mountains in September when the first colors started coming into the trees, and the roads through the gaps were the best riding of the year. The conversation of men who did not always have the vocabulary for the large things, and so moved naturally into the comfortable geography of the road, which said the same things in a different register. Gary Carver called that Thursday. Not about the situation, not about Kane's patch, or the network, or the 3 weeks he had been given and then exceeded. About a charter event, paperwork, a question about a vendor contract for the spring run. The ordinary administrative life of a chapter that had 15 years of operations behind it and needed its road captain to function. Kane answered all of it, and at the end Carver said, "She's doing okay. The Armstrong woman. Lisa Torrance told me she is." Kane said. The daughter too, Carver said. Yeah, a pause. Good, Carver said, and the word had a specific weight to it. The weight of a man who ran things by structure and discipline, and had watched someone run past the structure for the right reason, and had found a way to hold both the violation and the reason in the same frame. That was it. No more was said about it. The pen went back to turning, and the chapter went back to its ordinary operations, and Kane went back to being road captain in the practical, daily sense, which was the sense that mattered. He came back to the yellow house on Cutter Road one more time before Deborah and Clementine moved out. A Wednesday evening, the light going long and gold across the street, the first serious smell of fall in the air. She had started packing. There were boxes stacked in the living room, the bookshelves half emptied, the kitchen cleared to its bare essentials. The blankets had been taken down from the windows. The actual windows faced west, and the evening light came through them clean and direct. The kind of light that changed the room entirely, made it look larger and less like a place where something had been endured, and more like a place that had been lived in. Clementine was sitting cross-legged on the living room floor in front of the almost finished puzzle. She had the last section in her hands, the mountain background, the pieces that all looked the same from a distance and required close attention to place. She was working at it with the particular absorption of someone close to the end of something. Kane stood in the doorway. How many left? He said. She counted without looking up. 11. He sat on the floor beside her. They worked on it together for the better part of an hour. The puzzle in the evening light and the sound of Deborah moving through the kitchen doing the last of the dishes. It was a slow hour. Not much was said. Clementine had opinions about which piece went where, and Kane deferred to her on most of them, partly because she was right, and partly because it was her puzzle. When the last piece went in, she put her hands flat on the completed image for a moment, the way she sometimes put her hands flat on the table. But this was different. This was not bracing. This was the specific gesture of someone confirming a thing that was done. She looked at the horses in the mountain meadow. Complete. Good, she said. Yeah, Kane said. She looked at him. Will you come to the new place? I said I would, Kane said. She nodded. That was enough for her. She stood up and went to the kitchen to show her mother the finished puzzle. And Kane stayed on the floor for a moment, looking at the horses at the mountains in the background that had given her trouble for weeks. The pieces that all looked the same until you found the one that fit. He was still sitting there when Deborah came to the doorway. She looked at the puzzle. She looked at him. Thank you, she said. Not for the puzzle, for all of it. He stood. You don't have to. I know I don't, she said. That's why I am. He drove home in the last of the evening light, Route 9 south, the long way around past Barton's Fill, where the pumps were lit and the ceiling fan was visible through the plate glass window, turning slow the way it always turned, and past the stand of pines where he had pulled over the first day, and out to the county road where he opened the throttle and let the speed do what speed did, which was reduce everything to the immediate, to the road and the engine, and the air, and the forward motion that required only that you keep going. He thought about what it meant to stay. He had been in situations over the years where staying had been the harder thing, where the road offered an exit that was not quite running away, but was adjacent to it, where the easier thing was to ride past and not stop. He had stopped at Barton's Fill because something had caught his attention. He had turned around at mile marker 4 because something had taken up residence in him and refused to leave. He had gone back to the house a second time, and a third time, and a fourth, because he had told a child he would come back, and he was not the kind of man who said things he did not mean. That was the whole of it. That was all of it. Not a plan, not a calculation, not a strategic assessment of the situation. A child had said 3 words, and something in him had recognized the specific weight of those words from the inside, from the years he had spent learning the shape of that particular dark. And he had stopped and turned around and gone back. That was what staying looked like. Not permanent residence, not the surrender of the road, just turning around, just going back, just being present on a dead-end street in the rain because someone was counting and it had been long enough. He rode until the last of the light left the sky, and the stars came out. The Tennessee sky going dark and wide and clear, the way it went in the first week of September. And then he turned around and rode home and put the bike in the garage and sat on his porch with a beer he mostly did not drink, listening to the neighborhood settle into night around him. He thought about the woman in Georgia coaching a baseball team on Saturdays. He thought about Kendrick Vaughn riding through the rain from Asheville. He thought about Amari Riggs and the 47 riders from Birmingham. He thought about all the roads those people had ridden to get to one dead-end street in Knoxville on a wet weeknight, and he thought about what that road had looked like from a closed door through the gap where a broken door frame let in the rain and the sound of engines and the long bars of headlight, and he thought about a 7-year-old girl stepping forward into it. He thought about what Jerome from Birmingham had said when she thanked him, "Will always come." He had meant it as comfort in the moment. Kane thought it was also true. That kind of call would always find people who came, because there were always people who had been waiting for a reason like that. Not for violence, not for confrontation, for the chance to stand on a road in the dark and rain and simply be there, saying without words the one thing that most needed saying. You are not alone. He sat with that until his beer was warm and the neighborhood was fully quiet. Then he went inside and went to bed and did not count anything. Just the dark and the quiet and the ordinary breathing of a night with nothing in it to fear. The ride to Chattanooga that Sunday took an hour and 20 minutes on a clear morning with no traffic worth speaking of. Riggs was waiting at a rest stop on I-75, sitting on his bike with a bottle of water and the patient quality of a man who had long since made peace with waiting. He was 50, heavy set through the chest, with the kind of face that had been interesting before it was handsome, and had remained interesting after handsome became less relevant. He and Kane had met 3 years ago on a charity run through northern Alabama, and had been in the other's orbit ever since in the loose, non-obligatory way of men who trusted each other without requiring regular proof. Rhett pulled in behind Kane 90 seconds later, and behind Rhett, to Kane's mild surprise, Kendrick Vaughn, who had apparently decided the weather was indeed holding, followed by 3 riders from the Appalachian Brotherhood, all of them looking like they had been up since before dawn, which they probably had if they had come from Asheville. They rode into Chattanooga and found a diner with a parking lot big enough, and they ordered coffee and the kind of breakfast that sustained itself over hours of conversation. The morning came in through the wide front windows, the Tennessee River visible in the gap between 2 buildings, the light on it, the particular gold of early fall. Kendrick Vaughn said, "She really reached out." About the woman from Maryville. "Yeah," Kane said, "Riggs told me." Kendrick turned his coffee mug in both hands. He looked at the table. "She called my sister first," he said. 3 in the morning, which tells you something about when the weight of these things tends to arrive. "My sister called me at 8. He paused. "She said she had been watching for the story, watching for someone to do something about it. She said she had been watching for 8 years. The diner noise moved around them. Plates of coffee, the particular acoustics of a place that had been absorbing conversations for decades. 8 years, Kane said. Kendrick nodded. She moved to Georgia with her kids and she built something there, and she kept herself low, and she watched from a distance to see if anyone would ever actually do anything. He looked at Kane. She said the photographs were what got her. Not the story, the photographs. The images that had moved through social media after Cutter Road. Someone in the column had a phone and had taken pictures from inside the group, not of Tanner, not of anything confrontational, just the lights and the rain and the wet street and 87 bikes idling in the dark and a small girl in pajamas walking the line. The photographs had moved the way the right thing moved when it had visual evidence behind it, through community Facebook groups and local news shares, and then wider. The particular velocity of something that looked like what it was, without requiring explanation. Kane had not looked at the photographs himself until 3 days after. He did not entirely know how to look at them. They felt like something that had happened to other people, even though he had been in the middle of it. "She's not ready to give a formal statement," Kendrick said, "but she said she would write it down. For herself first, then maybe eventually for someone official." He paused. "Blackwood's been patient with her, not pushing." "That's the right call," Kane said. Rhett, who had been quiet through most of this, said, "What happens to Tanner? Legally, what's the actual outcome?" "That's the question," Riggs said. Kane thought about it. "The protective order is real," he said. "The investigation into the Lund network is real. The paralegal resigned. Lund is on administrative leave." He paused. "Whether any of that ends with Tanner in actual legal jeopardy depends on what Blackwood can build and how long the county attorney's office wants to pursue it." Which is to say, Rhett said he might end up living somewhere else and doing this again, Mike Kane said. Or it might not work as well somewhere else, now that there's a record. A protective order follows him. A documented pattern, once you have one, tends to attract the next filing. He paused again. The woman from Maryville never had a record. Deborah Armstrong does. And she will make sure Monique Okafor's documentation stays available and Blackwood's case stays alive. And the next person who looks up Dale Tanner on a database finds something. "That's not nothing," Riggs said. "No," Kane said. "It's not nothing." They rode back north through the afternoon, the sun lower now, and the light beginning its autumnal shift, something in the temperature suggesting what was coming. Kane rode with the road, doing what the road always did, reducing everything to the immediate. Just this, just the 20 feet of pavement in front of the wheel, and the sound of the engine and the air moving. He thought about something Carver had said to him 2 days after Cutter Road, when Kane had come in to give the final accounting. They had been alone in the back office, the pen turning in Carver's hands, the way it always turned when something mattered. "You know what the difference was," Carver had said, "between what and what Kane had asked. Between what you built and what could have gone wrong with it," Carver said. "Between a community response and something else." He had paused. "The difference was that you knew the people you called, and they knew why they were coming." He had looked at his pen. "That's it. That's the whole margin." Kane had sat with that. He had thought about Kendrick Vaughn and his riders from Asheville, and the way Vaughn had said his guys had been waiting for a reason like this for a long time. Men waiting for a reason. The thing that kept that from going wrong was not discipline in the abstract, not rules or structure, or the weight of 15 years of goodwill. It was specificity, the specific reason, the specific child, the specific house at the end of a specific road. When the reason was specific enough, men who were waiting for a reason could be waiting for the right one without knowing it. He pulled off the highway at his usual exit and rode the back streets into Knoxville, to the late afternoon light, the city going about its business. Around him, ordinary and indifferent in the way of cities which did not know and did not need to know about dead-end streets and blankets over windows and children counting minutes in closets. He stopped at Barton's Fill on Route 9 on his way back, pulled up to the same pump he had used the day this started. The station was quiet in the mid-afternoon, one other car at the far pump. Nobody on the curb. He looked at the curb. The stripe of shade from the overhang was there, same as it had always been. The concrete exactly as it was. A child could sit there and it would look exactly like it had looked 6 weeks ago, when he had noticed a girl who was in the wrong place and made the decision to crouch down and ask her name. He filled the tank. He went inside and paid for coffee he did not need and stood at the counter for a moment, letting the familiar sounds of the station settle around him. The cooler hum, the slow ceiling fan, the bell above the door. He thought about the morning he had stood outside after leaving Deborah Armstrong's house for the first time, when it had all still been a possibility rather than a fact. When Tanner was still protected by his systems, and Deborah was still alone in the yellow house, and Clementine was still counting. He had stood on the street and said to Rhett, "I need you to make some calls." And Rhett had said, "You thinking what I think you're thinking?" And Kane had said, "I don't know yet." He did know. He had known from the moment he had turned his bike around on Route 9. He had been finding the language for it, that was all. Finding the specific shape of what he intended. And the shape had turned out to be exactly what it was. Not a raid, not intimidation, not justice in any theatrical form. Just people on a road being present, saying without words what needed to be said. She's not alone. He walked back out to his bike. The afternoon was turning toward evening, the first cool shadows laying themselves down across the lot. He put on his helmet and settled it and started the engine and sat in the sound of it for a moment, that low, steady conversation between a man and a machine that had been going on for years and required nothing except the willingness to continue. He thought about Clementine one more time before he pulled out. Not the gas station version, the hollow-eyed child on the curb in the summer heat, counting nights she could not sleep. The porch version. The version who had sat between him and her mother with a book and said without looking up, "I slept last night all the way through without counting," and then had turned the page and gone on reading as if she had merely reported the weather. That was the whole of it. That was the thing he had turned his bike around for. Not the column, not the network, not the filing or the protective order or the metadata from a DCS record entered at 3:47 in the morning. All of that was real and necessary and had its own weight. But the thing underneath all of it, the specific gravity that had pulled him off Route 9 and back to a gas station curb, was a child who needed to sleep and could not. She was sleeping now. He pulled out of Barton's Fill onto Route 9 and opened the throttle and let the road do what the road did. And the engine rose into its voice, and the trees went by on both sides, going gold at the edges, and the sky above was the clear, particular blue of a September morning in Tennessee. And the distance to Chattanooga was exactly the distance it had always been. And the men who would be waiting there were the men they had always been. And all of it was ordinary, and all of it was good. There was one more thing that Kane did not know until the Friday before Deborah and Clementine's move. He had been at the garage on Merchant Street doing the ordinary work of a road captain in the week before a chapter run coordinating routes and logistics and the dozen small administrative things that tended to stack up when you had been occupied with something else. Rhett was with him, working at the bench, the two of them in the comfortable silence of shared labor, when Lisa Torrance knocked on the side door and came in with a paper bag from the bakery 2 blocks down that she sometimes brought when she had news she wanted to soften with something sweet. Kane looked at the bag. "What is it?" he said. Lisa set the bag on the workbench and pulled out a folder from under her arm instead. "Clifton Reese," she said. "The county clerk." Kane waited. "He gave a statement to the county attorney's office 2 days before you all showed up on Cutter Road," she said. "I only just found out because he attached a copy to a letter he sent to his supervisor requesting a formal review of certain administrative procedures in the clerk's office." "What did the statement say?" Kane asked. She opened the folder. The language was careful, the language of a man who had spent 3 years doing small things he knew were wrong, and was now trying to find the exact words that described those things accurately without overstating them in either direction. But what it amounted to was this: Clifton Reese had been receiving requests from Dale Tanner for 3 years. The requests had always been framed as administrative courtesies, small things, clerical things, the kind of friction that systems generated naturally and that someone with inside knowledge could reduce. He had complied because the requests were small and because he had told himself each time that they were small enough not to matter. The second protective order filing, Lisa said, Clifton Reese confirmed that he received instructions to delay its processing. Not to lose it, not to destroy it, to delay it. The delay had extended past the filing deadline for that type of petition. The filing had technically expired. Kane sat with that for a long moment. The second filing had not disappeared into an administrative gap. It had been walked to the edge of its deadline by someone who knew exactly how long the gap needed to be. "Does Deborah know?" Kane asked. Lisa looked at him. "I wanted to tell you first." Kane thought about that, about a woman who had filed twice and been failed twice and had kept the second copy of every document because she was careful and had been made to be careful, and who was now packing boxes in a yellow house she was leaving for somewhere better. "I'll tell her," Kane said. He drove to the house that afternoon. Deborah answered the door with paint on her hands from something she had been doing in the back bedroom. She looked at his face and said, "What?" He told her about Clifton Reese. He told her the same way he had told her everything else plainly, without softening it, because she had been managing the truth of this situation for 8 months, and she deserved the unfiltered version. She stood in the doorway and listened. When he was done, she turned and walked to the kitchen and stood at the counter with her back to him for a long moment. He waited. He had learned to wait. She said without turning, "I knew it wasn't random. I knew it wasn't friction. I knew that each time I tried something the right way and it didn't work, it was because someone had made sure it wouldn't work." She stopped. But knowing something and having someone confirm it are different things. "I know," he said. She turned around. She had the flat, composed expression on her face, the one he had seen the first day on the porch, when she had looked at him through the gap of a security chain. But underneath it, something had settled. The particular settling of a weight that has been held in uncertainty for a long time and has now found a surface. "He had a system," she said, "and it worked. Until it didn't." "Yeah," Kane said. "Until it didn't." She looked at him. "You know what the difference was? What finally made it stop working?" Kane thought about it honestly. He thought about the network and the riders and the rain and the night on Cutter Road. He thought about Blackwood and her monitored phone, and Monique Okafor and her metadata, and Clifton Reese and his statement. He thought about the woman in Georgia who had been watching for 8 years. "It stopped working," he said, "when too many people knew about it at the same time." He paused. He had been doing this to people who were alone. One woman, one set of officials, one county, a system he owned completely. He had never had to deal with something he couldn't contain because he had always made sure the people he was dealing with were already contained. He looked at her. "You weren't contained anymore. You had too many people who knew, too many directions for it to come from." Deborah looked at the window. The actual window now, the blanket taken down, the afternoon light coming through the glass and falling across the kitchen floor. She looked at the light for a moment. "Clementine," she called. A pause. "Then what?" "Come tell Kane about the puzzle." Footsteps in the hallway. Clementine appeared in the doorway in her school clothes, still wearing her backpack, apparently just home. She looked at Kane. "I finished it," she said. He nodded. "I know. I was there." She looked at her mother, then back at him. "I'm going to put it in the new place on the wall," she said. "I asked Mom and she said I could hang it in my new room." "That's a good plan," Kane said. She considered him for a moment with the assessment that was never entirely gone, the internal test she ran on everyone. The calculation that had been there since the gas station, and that he suspected would always be there, to some degree, built into her by months of learning that the world required careful attention. Then something loosened slightly in her face. "Will you come see where I hang it?" she asked. "Yeah," Kane said. "I'll come see." She went back down the hallway to her room, and the sound of a backpack being dropped and a drawer opening followed. Deborah watched her go. She looked at Kane. "She's going to be okay," Deborah said. It was not a question. It was the statement of a woman who had looked at the evidence available to her and reached a conclusion. "Yeah," Kane said. "She is." He drove home in the early evening, the light going long and orange across the streets of Knoxville, the city settling into the comfortable routines of an ordinary weeknight. People walking dogs, a group of teenagers on bikes taking up most of a side street, the smell of somebody's dinner coming out an open window, something with garlic and something with smoke. The ordinary archive of an ordinary evening in an ordinary place, all of it happening, all of it continuing indifferent to and sustained by the specific acts of specific people who had stopped and turned around and gone back. He parked a bike in the garage and stood for a moment in the particular silence of an engine going still that held breath of the machine returning to rest. He ran his hand along the tank the way he sometimes did, the instinctive gesture of someone who had spent so many years in relationship with a specific piece of machinery that the gestures had become automatic and carried no particular meaning except the meaning of continuation. He went inside. He made dinner. He ate it at the kitchen table with the radio on a country station out of Nashville that he rarely listened to but found himself turning to in the evenings lately. Something about the specific geometry of an ordinary meal and an ordinary hour and ordinary music that felt after the weeks that had passed, like the right register for the moment. After dinner, he sat on the porch and looked at the neighborhood going dark around him, the way it went dark every evening, house by house, the lights coming on inside, and the twilight settling over everything. And he thought about a child in a new room, hanging a finished puzzle on the wall, and going to bed in a house where the windows had real curtains, and the doors had good locks, and the man next door was simply a neighbor and not a program. He thought about what Jerome from Birmingham had said, "Will always come." He thought about the road captain in Asheville, and the 42 riders from the Appalachian Brotherhood, and the 47 from Birmingham, and all the chapters in between, all of them on their own porches now, or on their own roads, or in their own garages with their own bikes, and their own ordinary evenings connected to this night, and this street, and this child by the specific word that had traveled chapter to chapter across 6 states because the word was the right word to travel. He thought it would have been enough if only one person had come. He thought it would have been enough if it had just been him and Rhett on a dead-end road in the dark, standing there being present, saying with their presence the thing that needed to be said. 2 people, 1 street, 1 family. The basic arithmetic of someone choosing to stay. That the arithmetic had become 87 was something else. Something that had its own grammar, its own meaning, the particular message that could only be sent at that scale. But the beginning of it, the first term of the equation, was just a man who had pulled off a road onto a gravel shoulder and sat with a half-smoked cigarette and 3 words that had taken up space in him and refused to leave. He comes at night. Past tense now. He did not come anymore. The truck was gone. The property line was just a property line. The window latches were solid. The nights were ordinary. Kane sat on his porch until the neighborhood was fully quiet and the stars were out, and the September air had that particular quality of a season almost arrived 1 day past summer without quite being fall, balanced on the thin edge of the turning. Then he went inside, checked the locks out of the habit of a lifetime and the peace of a man who understood why the habit mattered and no longer needed it to protect him from anything present. And he went to bed and slept and did not count anything at all. In the morning he would ride. The road would be there. It always was.